She grabbed her doctor's hands so tight that little Rose winced, but Clara Whitmore did not let go. Not when she heard the words. Not when the whole town went quiet. Not when Nathaniel Hayes looked her in the eye, looked at her girls and said, "This is not what I agreed to." She had traveled 400 miles for that moment. She had packed everything she owned into one worn suitcase. And in 30 seconds, a man she had never met decided she was nothing. If that story moves you, please subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and drop a comment below telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. The train whistle screamed before the engine even stopped. Clara Whitmore felt it in her chest, that sharp metallic shriek cutting through the summer heat like a warning nobody wanted to hear. She sat on the edge of the wooden bench inside the passenger car, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap, every muscle in her body doing the quiet, invisible work of holding herself together. Rose sat pressed against her left side, 6 years old, and already too old for her age, watching everything with those serious brown eyes that never missed a thing. Emily was on her right, 4 years old, and fast asleep with her cheek against Clara's arm, her little mouth slightly open, completely trusting in the way that only very young children and people who have never been badly hurt can manage to be. Clara had not slept. Not the night before. Not the night before that. She had spent most of the journey sitting exactly like this, watching the landscape change outside the window. Watching the flat Middle States give way to something wilder, something bigger, something that felt like it could swallow a person whole if they let it. Montana was not what she had imagined. Or maybe it was exactly what she had imagined, and that was the problem. Too much sky. Too much open space. Too many places where a woman with 2 children and $14 to her name could simply disappear and nobody would come looking. She reached into the small wooden box sitting on her lap and touched the top letter without taking it out. She knew it by heart. She had read it so many times the paper had gone soft at the fold lines, the ink slightly smeared in 2 places where she had cried over it and not realized she was crying until the drops had already fallen. "Dear Miss Whitmore," it began. "I am a practical man, and I will write to you practically. I own 340 acres outside Willow Creek, Montana. I run cattle. I am 36 years old in good health, and I have not taken a drink in 4 years. I am not looking for a grand romance. I am looking for a partner. Someone with good sense and a strong character. Someone willing to build something real. Your letter was the most honest thing I have received in this entire process, and honesty is the thing I respect most in this world. I would be honored if you would consider coming to Montana." It was signed Nathaniel Hayes. She had written back immediately. She had told him everything. She had written about James, her husband, who had been killed 2 years earlier when a railroad coupling snapped and took 3 men with it into the dark water below a Missouri bridge. She had written about the debts that came after, about selling the furniture piece by piece, about moving in with James's mother, who was kind but fragile and could barely manage herself, about realizing slowly, and then all at once, that there was no path forward in Missouri that didn't require her to become invisible, to fold herself small enough to fit inside someone else's life and stay there forever. She had written about Rose and Emily. She had been very clear. "I am a widow," she had written. "I have 2 daughters. Rose is 6 and Emily is 4. They are good girls, quiet, obedient, and strong for their ages. I will not pretend they do not exist, and I would never ask a man to take on something he does not know about. If this is too much, please say so honestly, and I will understand completely. But if you are a man who means what he says about building something real, then I believe we could build it together." Nathaniel had written back. He had said he understood. He had said he was looking forward to meeting all of them. Clara touched the letter one more time, then closed the box. The train was slowing. Rose straightened beside her. "Mama," she said quietly. "Are we there?" "We're there, sweetheart." Emily stirred, blinked, pressed closer. "Is he going to be nice?" Clara smoothed Emily's hair back from her forehead. She had asked herself that question approximately 400 times over the last 3 days. "I believe so," she said. "He wrote like a man who means what he says. What if he doesn't like us? Then we'll figure something else out." She kept her voice even. Easy. Like it was a small thing. Like it was not the thing that had been eating at her for 8 months. But I think he's going to like you just fine. You're very easy to like, Emily. Emily considered this seriously. Rose is harder to like. I am not, Rose said without looking up. You make that face. What face? The face like you're judging everybody. I'm just watching. It looks like judging. Clara almost smiled. Almost. She stood and gathered their things. The worn leather suitcase, the wooden box, Rose's small cloth bag, and she took a breath that was steadier than she felt, and she said, "Come on then, let's go meet Montana." They stepped off the train into a wall of heat and noise, and the particular kind of attention that small towns give to strangers. Willow Creek station platform was crowded. That was the first thing Clara noticed, far more people than she would have expected for a Thursday afternoon. They were not all waiting for passengers. Many of them were simply standing there watching. She felt their eyes before she could see their faces, that crawling sensation of being observed, catalogued, assessed. She held her chin level. She held her daughter's hands. And she looked for Nathaniel Hayes. She spotted him immediately. He was easy to find, tall, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, standing at the far end of the platform in a good hat and clean clothes. He held a sign with her name written on it. He was exactly what she had expected from his letters. Solid, serious. A man who had made up his mind about something and didn't need anyone else's opinion about it. She walked toward him. He saw her from 20 feet away. She watched his face change. It happened in stages. The first stage was recognition. He found her in the crowd, identified her, and something in his expression settled like a man who has been waiting and is now done waiting. The second stage came when he lowered his gaze and saw the girls. Rose walking straight and serious beside her. Emily dragging slightly wide-eyed, taking in everything. The third stage was the one that changed everything. His face went completely still. Not the stillness of a man who is processing something unexpected. The stillness of a man who has already made a decision. Clara had seen that expression before on faces that had already closed a door while still standing in front of it. She kept walking. She stopped 3 feet in front of him. "Mr. Hayes," she said. He looked at her. He looked at Rose. He looked at Emily. He looked back at Clara, and something happened in his eyes that was not kindness. "Miss Whitmore," he said. His voice was flat, careful, the voice of a man controlling something. "It's a pleasure to meet you in person," she said. "These are my daughters. Rose, say hello." "Hello?" Rose said clearly. Emily pressed close to Clara's side and said nothing. Nathaniel did not greet them. He looked at Clara, and she saw it happening, the calculation. The rapid, brutal arithmetic of a man deciding what something is worth in the space of 5 seconds. The faded blue dress that had been her best dress 18 months ago. The cracked leather of her boots where the sole had started to separate on the left foot, and she had stitched it herself with heavy thread. The worn suitcase with the broken clasp she had tied shut with a piece of twine. The 2 children, one of them hiding behind her mother's skirt. He took 1 step back. Just one. Small enough that maybe half the crowd didn't notice. Clara noticed. "This isn't what I expected," he said. The platform had gone very quiet around them. Not completely. There was still the distant clanking of the train, the murmur of people further down, but in their immediate circle, in the space where the town had gathered to watch the mail-order bride arrive. The quiet was the kind that meant everyone was listening. "I wrote to you about my daughters," Clara said. "In my very first letter. I expected a widow, a woman who needed a fresh start." He said it the way men say things when they want to sound reasonable while doing something that is not. "I didn't expect." He stopped, looked at the girls again, looked back at her. "I run a cattle ranch, Miss Whitmore. It is hard work, long days. It is not a place for—" He paused again, choosing his word carefully. "Complications." The word landed like a stone in still water. Clara felt Rose's hand tighten around her fingers. She did not look away from Nathaniel Hayes. "Complications," she said. "I run a cattle ranch, Miss Whitmore. I needed a partner, a helpmate. Not—" He gestured vaguely in the direction of the girls' additional burdens. Someone in the crowd made a sound. Clara couldn't tell what kind. "I wrote to you about my daughters," she said again very quietly. "I was explicit. I described them by name and by age. I told you they would be coming with me. You wrote back and told me you understood. I may have been optimistic." "You were dishonest," she said. "There is a difference." His face shifted. Something moved through it, not shame. Nathaniel Hayes didn't carry shame easily. It was closer to irritation. The irritation of a man who expected compliance and was not getting it. "I don't think there's any call to be accusatory, ma'am." "I'm not being accusatory. I'm being accurate." The crowd was very still now. "I needed someone who could help me build something," he said, and now his voice had an edge in it. The edge that comes when a man who is used to being respected stops pretending not to be angry. Not someone who would arrive with problems already made. "I have enough problems of my own. What I can see in front of me is not a partner. It's a woman who came here hoping to be taken care of. That's not what I advertised for." The words hit her like something physical. Not because they were cruel, though they were cruel. Not because they were public, though the public nature of them was its own particular wound. They hit her because she recognized them. She had heard variations of those words her entire life. From her father, who had wanted a son. From James's creditors, who had looked at her and seen liability. From the women at church back in Missouri, who had whispered about her situation in voices just loud enough to be heard. Too much trouble. Too little value. Too many problems for a life that only has room for easy things. She stood there on the platform in Willow Creek, Montana, 400 miles from anything familiar, holding her daughter's hands, and she felt the crowd watching her, and she understood that this was a test. Not the test she had prepared for, not the test of whether she was a good enough wife, or a capable enough partner, or a worthy enough woman. This was a different test entirely. This was the test of whether she would let someone else write the ending of her story. She looked at Nathaniel Hayes for a long moment. She looked at his clean clothes and his good hat and his carefully controlled expression, and she saw exactly who he was. Not a bad man precisely. Worse than that. A small man wearing the costume of a significant one. Then she picked up her suitcase. "You're right about one thing," she said, and her voice was so steady it surprised her. "I did come here hoping to build something. I still intend to, just not with you." She looked at Rose. "Come on, sweetheart." She looked at Emily. "Let's go." And she walked away. She did not look back at Nathaniel Hayes. She did not look at the crowd, which had gone completely silent, now the kind of silence that comes when something happens that a town will talk about for 20 years. She walked to the end of the platform and down the wooden steps and onto the main street of Willow Creek, Montana, with her suitcase in one hand and her daughter's hands in the other, and she let herself breathe. Behind her, here she could hear the crowd beginning to murmur. She could hear Nathaniel's voice lower now, explaining something to someone defending himself, the way men who have done wrong things defend themselves by making the other person sound unreasonable. She did not stop. She did not slow down. She walked 2 blocks before Emily said very quietly, "Mama, where are we going?" And Clara stopped walking. Just for a moment. She looked down at her younger daughter's face, those wide, trusting eyes that had not yet learned to be anything but trusting. And she felt the full weight of what had just happened settle across her shoulders, like something she would have to carry for a long time. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "But we're going somewhere. That's enough for right now." Rose looked up at her. That face, serious, watchful, the one Emily said looked like judging, but was really just seeing, was very still. "He was wrong about us, Mama," she said. "I know he was. We're not a burden." "No, sweetheart, we are not." "We're a gift," Emily said firmly. Clara looked at her daughters and felt something move through her that was stronger than the humiliation, stronger than the fear, stronger than the very reasonable voice in the back of her head that was pointing out that she had $14, no place to sleep, and no plan whatsoever. She almost smiled. "Yes," she said, "that is exactly what we are." She found work that first week, the way people with no other options find things, by asking everyone who would listen. She went into every business on the main street of Willow Creek. The general store, the post office, the laundry, The two saloons that she entered with her chin level and her daughters behind her, ignoring the looks. The seamstress shop. The hotel. Most people turned her away politely. Some turned her away less politely. The seamstress, a small sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Aldridge, who wore her gray hair in a bun so tight it seemed to pull her eyebrows toward her ears, offered her piecework. Mending. Alterations. Nothing steady, but enough to start. "You any good with a needle?" Mrs. Aldridge asked, looking at Clara the way a person looks at a horse they're thinking about buying. "I'm better than adequate," Clara said, "and I learn fast." "Modest," Mrs. Aldridge said, but not unkindly. "Practical," Clara corrected. Something shifted in the older woman's expression, not quite approval, but close. "I don't have a place for you to stay," she said. "I want to be clear about that. This is work, not charity." "I understand completely," Clara said. She slept the first 3 nights in the back room of a church, whose pastor was a nervous young man who seemed uncertain whether offering shelter to a strange woman and 2 children was his Christian duty or a dangerous mistake. He decided in favor of Christian duty, though he looked like he regretted it every time he saw them. Clara was grateful and did not make him regret it. She kept the room clean, kept the girls quiet, and was out every morning before the first parishioners arrived. The gossip, of course, had preceded her. In a town, the size of Willow Creek. What happened at the train station was the biggest thing to happen in months. By the day after her arrival, there was not a person in town who hadn't heard the story. Though the version most people were telling was not exactly the version that had happened. In the most popular telling, Clara had arrived clearly misrepresenting herself, had attempted to manipulate Nathaniel Hayes into accepting responsibility for children he hadn't agreed to, and had made a scene when he reasonably declined. She heard this version from 3 different people within the first week, usually delivered in the form of a warning. "People are saying things about you," the pastor's wife told her on the second morning. Not unkindly, but with the particular brand of concerned frankness that meant she believed some of the things being said. "You'd do well to keep your head down." "Thank you," Clara said. "I'll keep that in mind." She did not keep her head down. She kept her head exactly where it was. Level. Forward. She walked through Willow Creek every day with her daughters beside her, and she did her work with enough precision and enough care that even the people who had already decided she was trouble found themselves unable to say she hadn't done the job right. She cleaned houses for 3 families who needed someone temporary. She organized the merchant accounts for 2 shops whose bookkeeping had grown disastrous over the summer. She discovered doing this that she was better at numbers than she had known, that the years of managing a household on shrinking resources had given her an instinct for where money was going and where it was leaking away. Mr. Calloway, who ran the feed store, looked at her work for a long moment before speaking. "You've done this kind of thing before." "Not professionally," she said, "but I understand how it works." He looked at her over his glasses. "Nathaniel Hayes was a fool," he said, which was the closest anyone in Willow Creek had come to saying something in her defense. "He was mistaken," Clara said, which was the closest she allowed herself to say. The weeks passed. She found a room to rent above the laundry, small hot in the evenings, with a window that looked out over the alley and walls, thin enough to hear Mrs. Cho's conversations 2 floors down. But it was theirs. A door she could close. A key she could turn. She paid the first 2 weeks from her mending income, and the knowledge that there would be a 3rd week if she kept working settled something deep in her chest that had been unsettled since Missouri. Rose started helping her sort thread at Mrs. Aldridge's shop. Emily spent mornings sitting very still in a corner, drawing pictures of horses on the backs of paper scraps, and afternoons asking anyone who would listen extremely detailed questions about whatever they happened to be doing. Clara watched her daughters and felt 2 things simultaneously, the way she had learned to feel 2 things simultaneously over the last 2 years: grief and gratitude. Grief that they had to be so capable so young. Gratitude that they were. She thought sometimes about the letter in the wooden box, about the word honest. How Nathaniel had said honesty was the thing he respected most in this world. She thought about what it meant when a person said they valued something and then demonstrated when it mattered that they didn't. She thought about this, not with bitterness, or not only with bitterness, but with the careful attention she gave to things she was trying to understand. Because she was trying to understand the shape of the world she had arrived in. The rules of Willow Creek. What mattered here and what didn't. Who had power and how they used it. She was beginning to form a picture. Nathaniel Hayes was at the center of it, not because he was cruel, though he was capable of cruelty, but because he was significant in a way that a frontier cattle town made certain men significant through property, through history, through the simple fact that he had been there long enough that people had stopped questioning whether he deserved to be taken seriously, and simply took him seriously out of habit. He ran the largest cattle operation within 40 miles. He sat on the town council. He was by all accounts financially successful and socially respected. The kind of man who could reject a woman publicly on a train platform and have half the town nod along within 24 hours. Clara noticed something else, though. Nathaniel Hayes moved through Willow Creek with the confidence of a man who had never been challenged by anyone with nothing to lose. She found out about Elias Carter, the way she found out about most things in Willow Creek, by paying attention to the edges of other people's conversations. She heard his name first from Mr. Calloway, the feed store owner, who mentioned him in passing while she was going through his accounts. Carter's ranch is going to go under by spring if he doesn't do something about those supplier contracts, he said more to himself than to her. Good man, but he doesn't have an eye for business. What kind of supplier contracts? Clara asked. Calloway looked at her over his glasses with a slight surprise that was becoming his usual expression around her. You don't know Elias. I don't know many people yet. Good man, Calloway said again, which seemed to be his complete assessment. Quiet. Keeps to himself. Ranch is outside town, about 4 miles, been in his family since his father came out here. But there are a few people who would very much like to see him fail. He said this last part carefully, and then said nothing more in the way of men who have already said more than they intended. She heard the name again 2 weeks later from Mrs. Aldridge, who mentioned that Carter's ranch hand had come in looking to sell a saddle because they were running short on supplies. And again from the pastor's wife, who said something about Elias Carter being a decent man who kept to himself too much, and that wasn't healthy for a man his age. Clara filed the information away, the way she filed all information. Carefully. Without forcing it into a shape it wasn't ready to take. The storm came in the second week of September, without much warning. 1 hour, the sky was the particular hard blue of a late summer afternoon, and the next, the light had gone strange and yellow, and the wind had shifted to something that pressed against you like a hand. Clara was on her way back from a cleaning job across town, later than she'd planned, Rose and Emily walking one on either side of her, when the sky opened. Not gradually. All at once. The rain came down in sheets, the kind that soaked through everything in seconds, and the wind was sharp enough to make walking into it genuinely difficult. Emily stumbled. Clara caught her, looked around at a landscape that had gone gray and confused, and made a decision. The laundry room was 20 minutes back in this. There was a barn she had noticed on her walks, old but solid-looking, set back from the road about 300 yards across an open field. This way, she said. Run. They ran. The barn was unlocked, latched, but not padlocked, and Clara shouldered the heavy door open and got her daughters inside and got the door shut behind them and stood for a moment in the dim, sweet-smelling interior, breathing. The sound of the rain on the roof was enormous. It turned the whole world into thunder. Emily was shaking. Clara knelt and pulled her close, looked at Rose, who was wet through and perfectly steady water streaming from her dark hair. You all right? I'm cold, Rose said. I know. Give it a few minutes and we'll figure out the next step. There was hay. Old, musty, but dry. Clara pulled a pile of it together in a corner and settled her daughters into it, wrapping her own coat around Emily, and then she sat beside them in her damp dress and listened to the storm and thought with the calm, methodical part of her mind that never fully stopped working about what she was going to do next. The barn door opened. The man who came in was tall, dark-coated, soaking wet, and holding a lantern. He stopped when he saw them. Just stopped completely. Door still open behind him, rain blowing in sideways, and looked at Clara and Rose and Emily, who had burrowed so deep into the hay that only the top of her head was visible. Clara stood. She said, I apologize for the trespass. We were caught in the rain. We needed shelter. She said it straight and clear, the way she said everything now without apology in her voice, even when the words were apologetic. We haven't touched anything. We'll be gone as soon as the storm eases. He closed the door. He set the lantern on a post hook. Howe was maybe 38 or 39 with dark hair gone gray at the temples, and a face that had spent a long time in weather. Not a handsome face particularly. It was too angular for that, too worn. But it was a face you could read, and what Clara read in it, standing there in his barn, without permission, in the middle of a thunderstorm, was not anger. It was something much simpler. Concern. "Are they all right?" he said. His voice was quiet, low. "We're wet and cold, but unhurt," Clara said. He looked at the pile of hay where Emily was hiding, then back at Clara. "That's my house up the hill," he said. "I've got a fireplace going. You'd all be a good deal warmer up there." Clara looked at him steadily. She had learned to look at people steadily in the last 2 months. It was the best way to take their actual measure. "We don't know each other," she said. "No," he said. "We don't." He didn't seem offended by the observation. He seemed to find it reasonable. "My name is Elias Carter. I own this property. You're welcome to stay in this barn as long as you need to, and if that's what you'd prefer, I'll leave you to it. But the offer stands." Clara looked at him for another long moment. Then she looked at Emily's shaking shoulders in the hay. "Thank you," she said. "We'll take the house." He nodded once and picked up his lantern, and that was that. He did not make a production of it. He did not ask her name, or how she had come to be sheltering in his barn with 2 children in a thunderstorm. He simply led them up the short hill through the driving rain to a low solid ranch house and opened the door and held it while they went in. The warmth of it hit Clara like something physical. A good fire in a stone fireplace. A wooden table. 2 chairs and a bench. The kind of house that had been lived in for years by someone who used things without worrying much about how they looked. Elias Carter moved around the space with the easy efficiency of a man alone. He pulled a blanket from a chest by the wall and handed it to Clara for Emily. Without being asked, he put water on for coffee. He added wood to the fire. He did all of this without ceremony, without performing it. Emily had stopped shaking. Rose sat on the bench near the fire and watched him with the serious watching look that Emily said was judging, but wasn't. Clara stood near the fireplace with the wet coat beginning to steam and felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Safe. Not rescued. Not dependent. Not obligated. Just safe. The way you feel safe in a place where nothing is being asked of you. Where the person across the room is simply another human being who has decided for no complicated reason that you deserve to be warm. "Clara Whitmore," she said, because it seemed important to offer that now. "My daughters are Rose and Emily." He glanced up from the fire. "Elias Carter," he said again, as if reminding them both. "I know who you are," Clara said. "I've heard your name." Something shifted in his expression. Almost a question. He didn't ask it. "People say you're a good man," she said, "and that your ranch is in trouble." A very long pause. Elias looked at her. Not with offense, not with surprise, with that same quality of just looking, taking her in. "That's 2 different kinds of information to volunteer," he said. "I know," Clara said. "I volunteered both on purpose." Howe was quiet for a moment. He handed a cup of coffee to Rose, who took it with both hands, and a very small grave. "Thank you." He poured a second cup and held it out to Clara. She took it. "People talk a lot in this town," he said finally. "Yes," Clara said. "About you among other things. The supplier contracts especially." His jaw tightened, just slightly. "You're the woman from the train station," he said. It was not a question. "Yes." He nodded slowly. He looked at the fire. "I'm sorry that happened to you," he said. "Nathaniel Hayes has a way of believing that a thing's value is exactly what he's willing to pay for it." The words landed so cleanly that Clara needed a moment. "That's a very exact way to say it," she said. "It's taken me some years to find the words," he said. Rose looked up at him from her coffee. "He said we were burdens, she said with the directness of a 6-year-old who had decided this man was safe to be direct with. My mama and me and Emily. I heard, Elias said. He was wrong, Rose said. Yes, Elias said simply. He was. Emily emerged from beneath her blanket to look at him with enormous eyes. Do you have horses? She asked. I do, he said. Can I see them? Not tonight, he said. Storm's still going, but in the morning, if your mother says it's all right. Emily looked at Clara. Can I, Mama? Clara was watching Elias Carter. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the fire, giving her space to make the decision, without the pressure of his attention, which was either deliberate or instinctive. And she found she didn't know which, and it didn't entirely matter. We'll see about the morning, she said. The storm ran until nearly midnight. Elias gave them the house's only bedroom, cleared it without comment, moved himself to a chair by the fire. Clara put the girls to bed in the unfamiliar room, Emily falling asleep almost instantly, Rose lying awake for a while watching the shadows on the ceiling. Is he nice? Rose whispered. I think so, Clara said. He didn't ask us any questions. No, he didn't. Most people ask a lot of questions. I noticed that too. Rose was quiet for a moment. I like that he didn't, she said. So do I, Clara said. She sat with them until they were both asleep, and then she went out to the main room. Elias was still in the chair by the fire. He didn't appear to have moved. Clara sat down across from him on the bench at a proper distance, and they sat in the quiet of the dying storm for a moment before she spoke. Tell me about the supplier contracts, she said. He looked at her. I'm good with numbers, she said, and I'm good at seeing where things don't add up. I helped organize accounts for 2 merchants in town this past month. I don't want charity. But if your ranch is failing for reasons that have to do with paperwork and not with cattle, I might be able to help you. Elias Carter looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, What would you want in exchange? Clara said, Time. My daughters and I need time to build something of our own. If you let us stay while I help you, that's all I'm asking. He was quiet. The fire popped. The rain had slowed to something softer. You don't know me, he said. No, she agreed. But I know how you treated 2 cold, wet children who showed up in your barn without an invitation. That's a fair amount of information. Another long silence. The contracts are in a box in the back room, he said. You can look at them in the morning. Clara nodded. She stood and went back to the bedroom and lay down on the edge of the bed beside her daughters and stared at the dark ceiling and did not sleep for a long time. But for the first time since she had stepped off the train in Willow Creek, the sleeplessness was not fear. It was something that felt cautiously and against her better judgment like possibility, because she had come to Montana looking for a man who would choose her. What she had not expected, what she had no framework for, no letter to prepare her, no careful planning to account for, was that she might find a place where for the first time she could choose herself, and do it on terms that nobody else would get to define. The morning after the storm, Clara found the contracts before Elias even finished his first cup of coffee. She had been up since before dawn. That was habit now. 2 years of survival had rewired something in her, made sleep feel like a luxury she hadn't quite earned yet. She had dressed quietly, checked on the girls, and then gone to the back room where Elias had said the papers were kept. She lit a lamp, pulled the wooden box onto the table, and started reading. By the time Elias came in from checking the animals, she had 3 separate piles sorted in front of her, and a look on her face that he seemed to recognize immediately as trouble. What did you find? He said. Sit down, she said. He sat. She put the first document in front of him. This is your agreement with Harmon Brothers Supply signed 3 years ago. Do you see this clause right here? She pointed. This says your prices are fixed to a regional index. But this second document, she put it beside the first, is an amendment signed 8 months later. Same name, same company, but a different clause entirely. Your prices are now fixed to the supplier's discretion with 60 days' notice. Do you remember signing this amendment? Elias looked at the paper. His jaw tightened. I signed a lot of papers that year, he said. My father had just died. I was running the ranch alone for the first time. Someone knew that, Clara said. He looked up at her. This isn't an accident, she said. Someone brought you this amendment when you were grieving and overwhelmed, and probably not reading everything as carefully as you should have. And then 8 months later, Harmon Brothers raised their prices by 30%. And then again, 6 months after that. She put a third document on the table. And this is your account with the grain merchant. Do you see the delivery shortfalls you were charged for full deliveries that were never fully made? Not once, not twice, 17 times over 2 years. 17 times, Elias repeated. I counted twice, Clara said. To be sure. He was quiet for a long moment. The kind of quiet that isn't emptiness, but density too much being processed at once to let anything out. Clara watched him and did not fill the silence. She had learned that some silences needed to be left alone. How much? He finally said. In overcharges alone, close to $400 over 2 years. She paused. That's before I've gone through the rest of it. There's more in here. I can see the shape of it already. Elias put both hands flat on the table. He looked at the papers. He looked like a man who had been told something he had suspected for a long time, but had not had the words for, which is one of the worst kinds of news. Because it carries not just the shock of discovery, but the retroactive weight of all the time you spent not knowing. Who would do this? He said. Not angrily. Quietly. Clara hesitated. She had found the shape of it in the papers, but she hadn't found the name yet, not explicitly, not in writing. She had a suspicion already, a suspicion that had been forming since the night before, when Elias had said Nathaniel Hayes has a way of believing that a thing's value is exactly what he's willing to pay for it. But a suspicion was not a fact, and she was not a woman who confused the two. I don't know yet, she said. Give me more time with these. Rose appeared in the doorway of the back room in her stocking feet, hair unbrushed, looking from her mother to Elias with her careful eyes. Is something wrong? She asked. No, Clara and Elias said at the same time. Rose looked at them both with the expression that Emily called judging. It sounds like something is wrong, she said. Everything is fine, sweetheart, Clara said. Go wake your sister. We'll have breakfast. Rose retreated. They heard her small footsteps cross the floor, and then Emily's voice muffled through the wall, say something indignant about being woken up. Elias almost smiled. You're girls, he said. I know, Clara said. Rose is like you, he said. She takes things in before she says anything. Emily takes things in out loud, Clara said. This time he did smile, brief and quiet, and looked back down at the papers. What do you need from me? He said. All of it, Clara said. Every document you have, every contract, every receipt, every delivery record. I want to build a complete picture. That could take weeks. Then it takes weeks, she said. I'm not going anywhere. He looked at her then, and the look was not the careful, measured look of a man deciding whether to trust a stranger. It was simpler and more direct than that. It was the look of a man who had made a decision and was only now realizing he'd already made it. All right, he said. And that was how it started. They settled into the ranch. The way practical things settle, not dramatically, not ceremonially, but with the quiet momentum of people who have things to do and not enough hours to do them in. Clara and the girls moved into the two-room addition off the back of the main house that Elias said had been built for his mother and hadn't been used in 6 years. It was plain and spare and had a window that looked out toward the eastern pasture, and Emily immediately chose the corner nearest that window because she could see the horses from it, and that was all she needed to be satisfied. Clara worked on the papers every morning while the girls slept and again in the evenings after they were in bed. During the days, she helped with whatever needed doing, not cattle work, which was Elias and his one remaining ranch hand, a quiet young man named Thomas, who seemed uncertain how to behave around women and had settled on extreme politeness as his strategy. But the 100 other things that a working ranch required. Inventory, correspondence, the household accounts that had been kept in a system that was charitable to call a system. Elias worked from before dawn until dark, and came in with the exhausted efficiency of a man who had been alone too long. He was not a talkative person. Clara had established that within the first 3 days. But he was a listening person, which was different, and she was finding considerably rarer. "You don't ask questions," she said to him on the fourth evening. They were sitting at the table after supper, the girls asleep. Thomas long gone back to his bunkhouse, and she was going through the ledger while he repaired a piece of harness. It was a comfortable thing to say, because it was an observation, not an accusation. He looked up. "Does that bother you?" "No," she said. "It surprises me. Most people want to know things." "I figure you'll tell me what I need to know when it matters," he said. "The rest of it's yours." She looked at him for a moment. Most people would want to know why a widow with 2 daughters answered a mail-order advertisement in the first place. "I know why," he said. "You think you do. You wanted security for your children," he said. "You needed a situation that didn't require you to depend on someone else's charity. You had skills, and you were willing to work, and you needed somewhere to apply them." He paused. "Was I wrong?" Clara was quiet. "That was part of it," she said finally. "What's the other part?" She looked down at the ledger. "I wanted someone to look at me and see something worth choosing," she said. "Not a burden, not a complication, not a woman who arrived with problems already made." She said it evenly without self-pity, because self-pity was a thing she had deliberately burned out of herself over the last 2 years, and she was not about to let it grow back. "I wanted to be chosen. On purpose." The silence was not uncomfortable. Nathaniel Hayes didn't see that, Elias said. "No." He saw the dress and the boots and the children and added up numbers that had nothing to do with value. "Yes." She looked at him. "You knew him a long time." "Our fathers knew each other longer," Elias said. "And not well." She waited. He set down the harness. He had a way of doing that, setting something down when he was about to say something important, as if he needed his hands free for it. "My father's land is what Nathaniel's family has wanted for 30 years, he said. "My father wouldn't sell. I won't sell. That makes me a problem that needs solving." He said it without drama, just as fact. "The contracts you're finding, I suspected something was wrong. I didn't have the skill to prove it. I didn't have anyone to trust with it either." He paused. "Until now, I suppose." "Why do you trust me?" Clara asked. It was a genuine question, not a modest one. She wanted to understand the mechanism. Elias looked at her directly. "Because you walked away from Nathaniel Hayes without begging," he said. "A person who'll beg will also deceive. A person who walks away with their head up, that's someone who knows what they're worth and doesn't need anyone else to confirm it." He picked up the harness again. "That's worth something to me." Clara thought about that for a long time that night. She thought about it still when she found the name 3 weeks later. It was in the oldest papers in the box, a set of correspondence from 6 years ago, when Elias's father was still alive and in declining health. Letters between the elder Carter and a supplies broker named William Marsh. Ordinary letters, business. Letters, except that William Marsh, she discovered when she cross-referenced the signatures against newer documents, had also signed an amendment to a secondary supply agreement, in a handwriting that matched exactly one other signature she had seen in recent papers. Not William Marsh. Not Harmon Brothers. A holding company called Western Ridge Partners LLC, registered in Helena with a managing partner whose name appeared in a single line of a single document as N.T. Hayes. Nathaniel T. Hayes. Clara sat very still for a moment. She read the document again, then a third time. Then she went and stood in the doorway of the girls' room and watched them sleep for a moment. Rose on her back arms, flat at her sides like a soldier. Emily curled around the cloth rabbit she'd had since she was 2, and she thought about what she had just found and what it meant and what she was going to do about it. She went back to the table and started writing everything down. She wrote for 2 hours. When Elias came in from the early morning check the next day, Clara had 4 pages of notes and the relevant documents stacked beside them in order, and she poured him coffee without asking, and waited until he had taken a sip before she spoke. "Nathaniel Hayes is Western Ridge Partners," she said. Elias went very still. "I have the documents," she said. "The original supply agreements, your father signed the amendments that changed the terms, the holding company registration, the signature matching. It's not circumstantial. It's a pattern, and it's been running for 6 years. He was looking at the papers. He's been bleeding your ranch, Clara said, slowly and carefully in a way that looked like bad luck and poor management. He's been driving your value down so that when the land goes, when the bank calls the loan, or you can't make the supply payments, he'll be positioned to buy it at a fraction of what it's worth. She paused. That's the plan. He's been patient about it. Elias set down the coffee cup very carefully. 6 years, he said. Possibly longer, Clara said. I can only go back as far as the records go. He stood up and walked to the window. He stood there with his back to her, and she watched him and did not say anything because some moments require silence, and she had learned to recognize which ones. When he turned around, his face was controlled, but his eyes were not. He does this, Elias said. This is what he does. Not just to me, to anybody who has something he wants and won't give it to him. He finds the weak point and he applies pressure until... He stopped. My father used to say Nathaniel never fights you directly. He waits for you to fall over on your own. He's been helping you fall, Clara said. Yes. Elias looked at the papers on the table. What do we do with this? We're not ready yet, Clara said. We have evidence but not a complete chain. If we bring this forward now, he'll deny it, and we don't have enough to counter the denial. I need more time. He might not give us more time, Elias said. If he finds out you're here going through these records. He already knows I'm here, Clara said. Elias looked at her sharply. Mrs. Aldridge told me this morning, Clara said. He asked about me. Casually, she said, but she knows Nathaniel Hayes is casual, and she knows it isn't. She was very steady saying this. She had been steady since she'd heard it because she'd been expecting it. She had known the moment she sat down at this table and started working on these papers that eventually the work would be noticed. He wanted to know what I was doing at Carter's ranch. She told him I was helping with the accounts. She said he smiled and said that was very kind of Elias to take in strays. The word landed in the room like something thrown. She told you he said that, Elias said. She's a sharp woman, Clara said. She wanted me to know the word he used. Strays, Elias said, and the word in his mouth was nothing like the word in Nathaniel's. It was not contemptuous, it was quiet and furious, a different thing entirely. Let him think it, Clara said. Let him think I'm a poor woman he turned away who found a soft landing. That's what he expects. He expects us both to be exactly as small as he decided we were. She looked at him. Let him expect that. Elias looked at her for a long moment. You're not afraid of him, he said. I'm cautious of him, she said. That's different. Fear makes you retreat. Caution makes you careful. There's a difference, he agreed. And something in his voice when he said it, the quietness of it, the simple, unperformative agreement did something to Clara that she wasn't entirely prepared for. It moved through her like the first warmth of a fire after a long cold, and she recognized it for what it was, and set it aside with the calm deliberateness of a person who knows that feeling something and acting on it are two different propositions. She looked back at the papers. Give me 3 more weeks, she said. She got 2 before Nathaniel made his move. It came first through the town. The way his moves always seemed to indirectly through other people's mouths, shaped and aimed and delivered at a distance. Clara heard it from 3 different sources in the same week. The story was this: Clara Whitmore, the failed mail-order bride who had arrived in Willow Creek without means or prospects, had maneuvered herself into a vulnerable widower's household by using her daughters as sympathetic props. She was taking advantage of Elias Carter's well-known charity. She was running up debts in the name of the ranch. She was not to be trusted with accounts or records or anything of value. The story was so precise in its cruelties that it was almost admirable. Every element was designed to undermine exactly the things Clara had built. Her competence undermined by calling her a schemer. Her integrity undermined by calling her manipulative. Her children turned from daughters into tools. It was the same architecture as what he'd done at the train station, but more sophisticated, more patient. Clara heard the story and said nothing public. Privately, she worked faster. Rose came home from Mrs. Aldridge's. One afternoon she had taken to spending mornings there, sorting thread, listening to everything, and stood in the doorway with her coat still on and her face doing the serious watching look. "People are saying things about you again," she said. "I know," Clara said without looking up from the ledger. "Bad things." "I know that too." Rose came in and sat down at the table across from her. At 6 years old, she had the quality Clara had noticed of someone who needed to understand things fully before she could let them go. "Why do people say things that aren't true?" she asked. "Sometimes because they believe them," Clara said, "and sometimes because they want other people to believe them." "Which one is this?" "The second one." "Why do they want that?" Clara set down her pen. She looked at her daughter. The serious brown eyes, the straight spine, the patience, and she thought not for the first time that Rose was going to be formidable someday. She was already formidable now in the way that 6-year-olds can be when they have been paying close attention to a world that hasn't been particularly gentle with them. "Because someone is afraid of what we're finding," she said. Rose considered that. The papers tell a story that someone doesn't want told." "What do we do?" Rose asked. "We finish telling it," Clara said. "No matter who tries to stop us." Rose looked at the papers on the table. She looked at her mother. "Okay," she said simply, and went to hang up her coat. The evening it nearly broke the evening, Clara came closest to losing the steadiness she had built so carefully, came from an unexpected direction. She was walking back from town alone. Something she rarely did, but had needed that afternoon, and she was coming up the road toward the ranch when she saw a horse and rider at the gate. She recognized the horse before she recognized the rider. A big, gray, expensive, well-kept the horse of a man who spent money on the things that were visible. Nathaniel Hayes sat on that horse and watched her walk up the road and did not pretend he wasn't waiting for her. She stopped 8 feet from him. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "Mr. Hayes." He looked down at her from the height of the horse with the particular expression she was beginning to recognize as his primary one. Composed, slightly amused, the expression of someone who has decided in advance how the conversation will go. "I've been hearing you've made yourself comfortable out here," he said. "I've been working," she said. "Is that what you call it?" It was not a question. "What would you call it?" she asked. "I'd call it making the most of a difficult situation," he said. "And I can respect that, Miss Whitmore. I want you to know that. You're a resourceful woman. I may have been too hasty at the station." He paused, letting that settle. "I'd like to offer you a position. Real work with real pay. In town. I have a business office that needs someone with a head for figures. You could move back to town, get the girls settled properly, have a real salary." Clara looked at him. She understood immediately. The offer was not generosity. The offer was a way to get her out of this ranch and away from the papers. He had figured out what she was doing, and this was his polite version of stop. "I have work," she said. "Carter's ranch isn't exactly stable employment," he said. The pleasant tone did not waver. "A woman with 2 daughters to care for needs stability. I'm offering you that. A fresh start. No hard feelings about how things began." "No hard feelings," she repeated. "None," he said. "We all make mistakes." The calculation was exquisite. He was offering her a narrative in which his rejection of her at the station had been a mistake, a generous gesture of revision, and she was supposed to be grateful enough to accept the reframing and come along quietly. He was offering her money and respectability and the appearance of being chosen, which was, she realized with something cold moving through her, the exact thing she had told Elias she wanted that evening at the table. He had been listening to people. He had asked the right questions. He had found her want and shaped his offer around it. She looked at Nathaniel Hayes sitting on his expensive gray horse and felt something crystallize in her. Not anger, though anger was part of it. Recognition. "I appreciate the offer," she said, "but I'll stay where I am." Something changed in his expression. Still controlled, but something underneath it shifted. "I'd think carefully about that," he said. "I've thought very carefully," she said. "Elias Carter is a man with a failing ranch and a history of poor decisions," Nathaniel said. "Associating yourself with that kind of failure isn't going to help you build what you're looking for." I'll take my chances, Clara said. The pleasant expression held for another moment. Then it was gone, not replaced by anything dramatic, just gone like a lamp turned down. What was left was simpler and more honest, and significantly less comfortable to look at. "You're making a mistake," he said. "Then it'll be my mistake to make," she said. "Good evening, Mr. Hayes." She walked past him through the gate and up toward the house. She did not shake until she was inside with the door closed. She stood in the front room with her back against the door, both hands pressed flat against the wood behind her, and breathed carefully and let the shaking happen, because it needed to happen, and she was alone, and she could afford it here in this room for 60 seconds. She counted. She had learned to count through the shaking. It helped. Elias came in from the back of the house and found her there and stopped. He didn't say anything. She didn't explain. After a moment, he went to the fireplace and added wood to it, and then he put water on, and he moved around the room with the quiet efficiency of a man who understands that sometimes the most useful thing you can do for another person is give them something ordinary to stand next to. The shaking stopped. Clara let out a long breath. "He was at the gate," she said. "I saw him ride off," Elias said. "I started to come down." "I'm glad you didn't," she said. "It would have looked like I needed rescuing." "You didn't?" "No," she said. "I needed 60 seconds alone." She pushed away from the door. "He knows what we're doing. He offered me a position in town." Elias turned from the fire. "He offered you a salary, a fresh start, no hard feelings." She said it with the precise flatness of someone reporting facts. "He wants me out of these papers." "Then we're close," Elias said. "If he's offering you things, we're close to something he doesn't want us to find." "We're already there," Clara said. "I have enough to lay a pattern. What I don't have yet is the final link, the document that connects Western Ridge Partners back to the bank loan." She looked at him. "If he's pressuring the bank from the holding company side and the supply contracts from the other. If both arms answer to him, then the whole scheme is clear, not just suspicious, provable. The bank records aren't something I can just—" "I know," Clara said. "But someone at the bank knows, and people who know things tell them to other people. I just need to find the right person." "Who?" She thought for a moment. "Mrs. Aldridge," she said. He looked at her. "She told me the word he used," Clara said. "Strays. She didn't have to tell me that. She chose to. That means she's watching him too, and she's been watching for long enough to have her own reasons." She straightened her dress. The shaking was entirely gone now. "I'm going to go see her tomorrow." "Clara," Elias said. The way he said her name, just those 2 syllables stopped her. She turned and looked at him. How was standing by the fireplace with the lamp making him look tired and very solid and very real, and he said, "Are you all right?" It was such a simple question. She thought about all the times she had been asked versions of it in the last 2 years. Are you managing? Are you getting by? Are you holding up? Questions shaped like concern, but pointed at practical things, at stability, and finances, and logistics. He was asking something else. "I'm angry," she said honestly. "And I'm tired, and I'm not going to stop." She looked at him. "Is that all right?" "Yes," he said. "That's exactly all right." She went to bed that night with the anger still warm in her chest, and for once, she let it stay, because she had learned something important about anger on the road from Missouri to Montana used properly. It wasn't destruction, it was fuel. She was going to need every drop of it. Emily found her at the table before sunrise, which was unusual. Emily was not a morning child. She came padding out in her nightgown and her socks, and climbed onto the bench beside Clara, and leaned her head against Clara's arm, without asking if that was all right, because at 4 years old, Emily still operated on the correct assumption that she was always welcome. "Mama," she said. Is the bad man going to take the horses?" Clara was very still. "What bad man?" she asked carefully. "The one with the big gray horse," Emily said. "I saw him at the gate from the window. He looked at our house like he wanted it." Children see things, Clara thought. Children see things that grown people spend years learning to see again. No, she said. He is not going to take the horses. How do you know? Emily asked with the sincere curiosity of someone who wants to understand the mechanics. Clara looked down at her younger daughter. The trusting eyes, the sleep-rumpled hair, the entire steady weight of her leaning against Clara's side, and she felt the anger clarify into something harder and cleaner and more precise. Because I'm not going to let him, she said. Emily considered this for a moment with great seriousness. Okay, she said. She reached over and patted Clara's hand twice firmly, the way she had seen adults do it. Then she slid off the bench and padded back to bed. Clara sat alone at the table in the dark and looked at the papers. 400 miles from Missouri. $14 and 2 daughters. A man at the gate who thought they were strays. She picked up her pen. She got back to work. Mrs. Aldridge did not look surprised when Clara walked into the seamstress shop the next morning. That was the first thing Clara noticed. Most people, when you showed up with purpose and urgency written plainly on your face, registered at least a flicker of something curiosity, concerned the social reflex of adjustment. Mrs. Aldridge looked up from her work, looked at Clara, and simply set down her scissors. Like she had been waiting. Like she had known this conversation was coming and had simply been doing other things until it arrived. Close the door, Mrs. Aldridge said. Clara closed it. Sit down. Clara sat. Mrs. Aldridge folded her hands on the work table. She was a small woman, but she took up a great deal of space in a room the way certain people do not, through loudness or drama, but through the sheer density of accumulated observation. Clara had sensed from the beginning that this woman had been watching Willow Creek for decades and had filed everything she saw into categories that would never be spoken aloud unless the moment was exactly right. This apparently was the moment. You went through Carter's records, Mrs. Aldridge said. Yes. And you found something. I found several things, Clara said. And I think you know more than you've said. Mrs. Aldridge looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, Nathaniel Hayes ruined my brother-in-law's business 12 years ago. Feed operation 30 miles east. Not dramatic about it. No confrontation, no threats. Just paperwork. Contracts that turned bad. Suppliers that suddenly weren't available. A bank loan that got called in at exactly the wrong moment. She said it the way people say things they have said only to themselves for a very long time, with a flatness that means the grief has been processed but not released. My brother-in-law lost everything. Moved his family to Colorado. I stayed. Why did you stay? Clara asked. Because someone needed to watch, Mrs. Aldridge said. And because I knew he'd do it again. Men like Nathaniel Hayes always do it again. They can't help themselves. It's not even greed exactly. It's the needing to own what other people have. The needing to prove that everything has a price, and he's the one who gets to set it. She looked at Clara. Elias Carter's land is the last significant holding in this valley that isn't under Hayes's influence directly or indirectly. His father knew that. Elias knows it. Hayes has been working on it for years. I know, Clara said. I have documents. I have the connection between Western Ridge Partners and Hayes. I have the supply contract manipulation and 17 documented delivery shortfalls. What I don't have is the bank connection. Mrs. Aldridge was very still. The loan, Clara said. Elias has a bank loan due for renewal in the spring. If Hayes is positioned at the bank, if someone there is working with him to deny renewal or call the note early, then the supply contracts alone won't matter. He'll take the land through the bank instead. And what do you need from me? Mrs. Aldridge asked. A name, Clara said. Someone at the bank who knows. Mrs. Aldridge unfolded her hands and picked up her scissors again, not to cut anything, just to hold them. Clara had noticed that people who work with their hands often needed something in them when they were thinking hard about something they didn't want to think about. Harold Finch, Mrs. Aldridge said. He's been the bank's loan officer for 9 years. He's not a bad man. He's a frightened one. Hayes has something on him. I don't know what exactly, but I've seen the way Finch behaves around him. Like a man who knows he's already made a deal he can't undo. She paused. If Finch is managing that loan renewal, he's doing it under pressure. And a man under that kind of pressure is either going to hold forever or break at exactly the right moment. How do I know which one Finch is? Clara asked. You don't, Mrs. Aldridge said. You have to push him and find out. Clara thought about that. What does Hayes have on him? She asked. If I know that I might be able to find the right angle. Like I said, I don't know exactly. Mrs. Aldridge set the scissors down and looked at Clara steadily. But I know his wife left him 3 years ago, and he paid her a settlement that was considerably larger than his salary should have allowed, which means either he had money no one knew about or someone helped him with it. She paused. And I know that around the same time, a business competitor of his wife's family closed suddenly. Under circumstances that looked a great deal like the kind of circumstances Nathaniel Hayes specializes in. The implication landed clean and cold. He paid Finch with a favor, Clara said, and now Finch owes him. That's my reading, Mrs. Aldridge said. But reading and proving are different things. Yes, Clara said. They are. She stood. Thank you, Miss Whitmore. Mrs. Aldridge's voice stopped her at the door. Clara turned. The older woman was looking at her with an expression that was not quite warmth, but was close to it. The expression of someone who has been alone with a thing for a very long time, and is finally cautiously not alone with it anymore. Be careful with Finch. He's not dangerous on his own. But if he feels cornered, he'll go straight to Hayes. And Hayes will not make another polite offer. I know, Clara said. Do you? Mrs. Aldridge said. Because what he did to your reputation in town, the stories about you manipulating Carter, that was the polite version. He hasn't decided you're a real threat yet. When he does. She stopped. Just be careful. Clara walked back to the ranch in the cold morning air and thought about what careful looked like when you were a woman with 2 daughters and no power except what you could build with your own hands and your own mind. She thought about it for the entire 4 miles. By the time the ranch came into sight, she had a plan. She did not tell Elias the plan immediately. She told him what she'd learned from Mrs. Aldridge, and she watched him absorb the information about Finch with the controlled steadiness that was becoming his characteristic response to bad news. Not rage, not despair. Just a settling deeper into himself, like a man planting his feet on ground that is trying to move. Harold Finch, he said. You know him. I know his face. We've never had a real conversation. He looked at the wall above the fireplace for a moment. My loan renewal is in April. That's 5 months. I know. If the note gets called before then. It won't, Clara said. Not if we move first. She looked at him. I need to talk to Finch alone, before Hayes knows I've connected the bank to the rest of it. Elias looked at her sharply. Alone. Taking you with me signals that we know about the loan, Clara said. I need to go in as something less threatening, as a woman doing bookkeeping work who has some questions about standard contract terms. She held his gaze. He won't guard himself as carefully with me. Because he won't take you seriously, Elias said. Not an accusation. A statement of fact that tasted bad in his mouth. Nathaniel Hayes didn't take me seriously, Clara said. And look how far I've gotten. A long pause. I don't like it, Elias said. I know, Clara said. But I'm not asking you to like it. I'm asking you to let me do my job. Something moved through his expression. Something complicated that resolved after a moment into the thing she had come to recognize as his particular form of respect, which was stepping back when stepping back was the right thing to do, even when every instinct said otherwise. All right, he said. But if anything feels wrong, I'll come straight back, she said. She went the following Tuesday, because Tuesday was when Finch was in the bank alone. Mrs. Aldridge had told her that too, offered it at the end of their conversation, like a small additional gift, unnecessary but precise. The regular loan officer's assistant took Tuesdays for personal business. Finch managed the front alone. She brought Rose. This was deliberate. A woman alone going into a bank to ask questions about contract terms was notable. A woman bringing her daughter looking for practical information in the manner of someone managing a household account was invisible in the particular way that mothers with children were always invisible to men who had decided they were small, Rose understood this without being told. She sat in the chair beside Clara, with her small hands folded in her lap, and her watching expression firmly in place, and she did not fidget, and she did not speak unless spoken to, and she was. As Clara thought not for the first time going to be an extraordinary person someday. Harold Finch was a thin man with careful eyes and the particular quality of someone who had been performing confidence for so long, he'd forgotten what actual confidence felt like. He shook Clara's hand. He smiled at Rose. He offered them both a seat with the overdone hospitality of a man who wanted to seem like he had nothing to hide. Clara had learned going through Elias's papers that the best way to read a document was to look for what wasn't there. The absence of information told you as much as the presence of it. She had learned going through life that the same was true of people. What was absent in Harold Finch was ease. "I'm helping manage accounts for the Carter Ranch," she said pleasantly. "Just bookkeeping work, nothing complicated. But I had some questions about standard loan renewal terms in Montana. I want to make sure I understand the process so I can help Mr. Carter prepare his paperwork properly. You're the expert, and I didn't want to bother Mr. Carter with questions he might not know the answers to." She said it with precisely the right degree of deference. Not enough to be obvious, just enough to make Finch feel knowledgeable. He relaxed. Barely, but she saw it. "Of course," he said. "Renewal terms are fairly standard. The bank reviews the loan performance over the previous term, current collateral value, and the borrower's overall financial position." "And collateral value," Clara said. "That's determined. How is there an independent appraisal, or does the bank conduct its own assessment?" "The bank conducts its own assessment," Finch said. "Though we do sometimes bring in outside expertise for larger properties." "Interesting," Clara said. She tilted her head slightly as though thinking. "And if there were, say, ongoing disputes about property boundaries, historical disputes, nothing current, would that affect the collateral assessment?" Something shifted in Finch's eyes, fast and then gone. "It could," he said carefully, "depending on the nature of the dispute." "I ask because I came across some old correspondence in the records," Clara said. "From about 6 years ago. A boundary question between the Carter property and the adjacent land. It seemed to be resolved, but I wanted to make sure it wouldn't cause any complications for the renewal." She smiled. "I'd hate for Mr. Carter to be blindsided by something administrative." Finch was very still. "I wouldn't know about that specifically," he said. "Of course not," Clara said warmly. "But you'd be the one to flag it if it came up in review, I imagine." "As the loan officer." "I'd be one of the people involved in that process, yes." "Who else would be involved?" Clara asked. The pause before his answer was 3 seconds too long. "That's an internal process," he said. "Naturally," Clara said. She stood and smoothed her skirt. "You've been very helpful, Mr. Finch. I appreciate you taking the time." She held out her hand. He shook it. "I'll tell Mr. Carter he's in good hands." She watched his face when she said it, and she saw what she needed to see. The flicker. The smallest possible flinch at the phrase "in good hands," as though the phrase itself reminded him of something he was trying not to think about. She had what she needed. She and Rose walked out of the bank into the cold October air, and Rose immediately said, "He was lying." "Yes," Clara said. "About what?" "About how much he knows," Clara said. "And about who else is involved in the loan review." "How do you know?" "Because he stopped breathing normally when I mentioned the boundary dispute," Clara said. "And because the only people who know about that boundary question are people who've been looking very carefully at that property for a very long time." Rose thought about this. "Like Mr. Hayes," she said. "Like Mr. Hayes," Clara said. They walked in silence for a moment. Then Rose said, "Mama, what happens if we can't stop him?" Clara kept walking. She kept her voice level and her pace steady, and she said, "We stop him." "But what if—" "Rose." Clara stopped and looked at her daughter. The cold air was sharp and the street was quiet, and she looked at this 6-year-old person who had already learned more about the world's cruelties than any child should have to know, and she said, "I have never in my life promised you that everything will be easy. But I promise you this, I will not stop. Do you understand me? I will not stop." Rose looked at her for a long moment with those serious eyes. "Okay, Mama," she said. They went back to this ranch. Clara put together the full picture that night. She sat at the table until past midnight. Papers spread across every surface, and she built it piece by piece, the way you build something that has to hold weight carefully, checking each joint before you move to the next, making sure nothing was assumed that wasn't documented. The supply contracts manipulated through Western Ridge Partners. The delivery shortfalls, systematic and deliberate. The amendment to the original supply agreement introduced when Elias was grieving and alone. The boundary she found it now that she knew to look buried in a folder of old correspondence, a claim that Hayes's family had made on a strip of Carter land decades ago that had been dismissed by the county but never formally closed. Enough of a ghost to be raised again if someone with influence wanted to complicate a loan renewal, and Harold Finch positioned at the center of the banking process, owing Hayes a debt that could be called in at exactly the right moment. It was elegant in the way that purely predatory things were sometimes elegant, designed to look like misfortune from the outside, like a series of bad breaks that happened to a man who wasn't quite careful enough. The truth was something different. The truth was that someone had spent years building a trap and baiting it and waiting with extraordinary patience for it to close. Clara sat with that truth for a long moment. Then she picked up her pen and started writing the document that would take all of it apart. She was halfway through it when she heard the sound. It came from outside. Not a dramatic sound, not a crash or a shout, but the specific soft sound of a horse being walked quietly past the house. At midnight, on a road that led only to the Carter ranch. Clara set down her pen. She sat very still and listened. The sound faded. Footsteps on the porch, also quiet. Careful, the footsteps of someone who did not want to be heard. Clara stood up. She moved to the back of the house to the girls' room, and she opened the door and checked. Both of them sleeping. She closed the door quietly. She went back to the front room and picked up the lamp and went to the window and looked out. Nothing. But the feeling remained, that particular electricity of being watched, of being in a space that someone else is also occupying without your knowledge or consent. She heard Elias's door open. He came out in his work clothes. He hadn't been sleeping either, she realized, and he took one look at her face and went immediately to the front door and opened it. The paper was nailed to the doorframe, not with nails, with a single nail driven clean. The paper was folded once. Elias took it down and brought it to the lamp and read it, and Clara watched his face as he read it and saw the jaw tighten and the eyes go flat. He handed it to her without speaking. She read it. It was not a letter. It was a legal notice, a document claiming that Western Ridge Partners held a prior lien on a portion of the Carter property dating to an unresolved debt from the elder Carter's time, and that this lien would be formally registered with the county unless the matter was resolved privately within 30 days. It was signed by a law firm in Helena that Clara had never heard of. She read it twice. She looked at Elias. "He knows," she said. "Yes," Elias said. "He's moving faster than I expected." "Yes," Elias said again. His voice was controlled, but she could feel the pressure behind it, the accumulated weight of years of this, of watching his father's legacy being slowly dismantled by someone who had decided it was his to take. "He's done waiting." "So have I," Clara said. She went back to the table. She sat down. She picked up her pen. "Clara," Elias said, "it's past midnight." "I know," she said. "You've been working since before dawn. I know that too." He was quiet for a moment. Then he sat down across from her, not to work, not to ask questions, just to be there. He put his hands on the table, and he sat in the lamplight, and he did not say anything else, and Clara worked, and the silence between them was the comfortable silence of two people who have stopped needing to explain themselves to each other. She finished the document at 2 a.m. She set down her pen and looked at what she had built. 18 pages. Every link in the chain documented. Every connection named. Every shortfall. Every manipulation. Every pressure point laid out in the clear, unambiguous language of someone who has spent a lifetime learning to be precise because precision was the only weapon available to her. "It's done," she said. Elias looked at the stack of papers. Is it enough? He said. Yes, Clara said. It's enough. He looked at her. What do we do with it? We need someone with legal standing to present it, she said. Not you and me. Someone the town council will have to take seriously. Who? She thought about it. Not long. She had been thinking about it all night in the part of her mind that kept working even when the rest of it was doing something else. Judge Harlan, she said. He's the circuit judge. He comes through Willow Creek the first week of November. That's 2 weeks away, Elias said. I know. Hayes filed that lien notice tonight. He's not going to wait 2 weeks without doing something else. No, Clara agreed. He isn't. She looked at Elias. Which means we need to be ready for whatever comes next. What comes next? She looked at the papers on the table. Then she looked at him. He's going to try to make us look like the problem, she said. He's done with the quiet version. The stories about me manipulating you, the lion notice, that's him shifting tactics. The next move is public. He's going to make a scene, and he's going to make sure it's the kind of scene where we look unreasonable, and he looks wronged. Elias was quiet for a moment. And when he does, we let him, Clara said. He stared at her. We let him make his scene, she said. Because when he does, he's going to say things in front of witnesses. And we're going to be ready with everything we have, and he's not going to know we're ready, and when the moment comes... She touched the stack of papers. We won't be fighting him. We'll be showing the truth. That's a different thing. You can fight a lie and lose, but you can't fight a document. Elias looked at her for a long moment. You've been planning this since you went to the bank, he said. I've been planning it since the train station, Clara said. The look on his face when she said that. The way something opened up in his expression, something that had been carefully maintained behind the controlled steadiness of a man who had been fighting alone for too long, moved through Clara like warmth. Not love, she told herself firmly. Not yet. Something more careful and more durable than love. Something that might, given time and the right conditions, become love. She gathered the papers into a neat stack and put them back in the box and closed it. Get some sleep, she said. You too, he said. She almost smiled. Soon, she said. What happened 3 days later came from a direction Clara had not anticipated, which meant she had made an error. She had anticipated Hayes's public move. She had anticipated pressure from the bank. She had not anticipated that he would go through the children. She heard about it from Thomas the ranch hand, who came in from town looking uncomfortable in the way of someone who has information they don't want to deliver. Something happened in town, he said. I thought you ought to know. Clara set down what she was doing. Tell me. Thomas turned his hat in his hands. Mr. Hayes was in front of the general store this morning when your girls were walking back from Mrs. Aldridge's. He stopped them, talked to them. I wasn't close enough to hear all of it, but... He stopped, looked at his hat. Rose came and found me right after. She was pretty shaken up. I walked them back. Clara was already moving toward the door. She found Rose in the barn with Emily, which was where the girls went when things were difficult. Emily, because the horses made her feel better. Rose, because Emily needed someone steady, and Rose had appointed herself the person who provided that. She found them in the corner of the stall where the gentlest horse lived. Emily pressed against the animal's side. Rose standing between Emily and the rest of the world, with her arms crossed and her jaw set in a way that was purely Clara and hurt to see on a child's face. Clara crouched down to their level. Tell me, she said. Rose's arms stayed crossed. Her voice was controlled in the way Clara's was when Clara was managing something difficult. He stopped us on the street, she said. He crouched down like he was being friendly. He told us our mama was causing trouble for Mr. Carter. He said she was going to get Mr. Carter into trouble with important people, and that Mr. Carter would be better off if we left. She paused. He said sometimes mothers don't know what's best, and children can see things more clearly. The cold that moved through Clara was different from anything she had felt before. Not the cold of fear, or the cold of shock. The cold of understanding exactly what someone was willing to do. He had gone through her children, not to scare them, to make them doubt her, To plant a seed of worry in 6-year-old Rose that might grow into a question, was Mama making things worse? "Emily," Clara said carefully. "Are you all right?" "He had mean eyes," Emily said from behind the horse. "I didn't like him." "What did you say to him?" Clara asked Rose. Rose uncrossed her arms. She lifted her chin. She said with the clarity of someone who has been thinking about exactly what they wanted to say for the last hour. "I told him my mother doesn't need someone to save her. She already saved us." The words hit Clara like something physical. She pulled both girls into her arms and held them for a long moment, and she felt Rose's rigid spine slowly unknot against her, and she felt Emily's small hands grip her coat, and she breathed them in, and she thought this is what he cannot calculate. He can calculate supply contracts and lien notices and bank loans and social pressure. He cannot calculate what a woman will do when someone goes after her children. She let them go. She looked at Rose. "You were very brave," she said. "I was scared," Rose said. "That's what brave is," Clara said. "You were scared and you did it anyway." She stood. "You stay here with Thomas. I need to do something." "Mama," Rose said. Clara turned. Rose looked at her with those eyes that had seen too much for 6 years and had made their peace with it and kept watching anyway. "Get him," she said. Clara walked into Willow Creek, and she walked straight to the general store, and she walked through the door, and she stopped. Nathaniel Hayes was still there. He was standing at the counter talking to the store owner, relaxed and easy, the posture of a man on his own ground in a town that had always been his ground. 3 other men were present. And Mrs. Aldridge, who was standing by the fabric bolts at the far end of the store, and who looked up when Clara walked in with an expression that said she understood exactly what was happening. Hayes saw Clara. He smiled. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "Just the person." "You spoke to my daughters," Clara said. She did not shout it. She said it clearly and evenly in a voice that carried to every corner of the store. "I did," he said pleasantly. "Lovely girls. I simply wanted to express some concern." "You told my 6-year-old daughter that her mother was causing trouble," Clara said. "You told a child to doubt her mother, in the street, alone." She looked at him. "That's what you've been reduced to, Mr. Hayes. After the stories, after the lien notice, after the offer in the road, you went through my children." The store had gone very quiet. "I was simply expressing community concern," Hayes said. The pleasant expression had not moved. He was good at this. He had been doing it for years. "You arrived here without resources, without connections, without any real understanding of how things work in this community, and you've inserted yourself into a very complicated situation." "The situation isn't complicated," Clara said. "I've spent 8 weeks making it simple." She reached into her coat and pulled out a single folded document, not the full 18 pages. Just the summary she had written as a clear statement of the chain 2 pages in language that any literate person could follow. She held it up. "This is a summary of what I found in Elias Carter's records. Supplier contracts manipulated through a holding company called Western Ridge Partners, registered in Helena, managed by you. 17 documented delivery shortfalls. An old boundary dispute being resurrected as leverage. And a bank loan officer who has reason to remember what happens to people who cross you." She put the document on the counter between them. "That's the situation. You can read it or you can ignore it, but either way, it goes to Judge Harlan when he rides through in 2 weeks." The silence in the store was total. Hayes looked at the document on the counter. He looked at Clara. For the first time she had seen in all of their interactions, she watched him recalibrate. The pleasant expression faltered. Not collapsed, not broken, but faltered, the way a wall develops a crack before it decides whether to hold or fall. "You have no idea," he said, and his voice had changed, "what you're dealing with." "Yes, I do," Clara said. "I have 18 pages of it." Someone in the store made a sound. Clara still didn't look. She kept her eyes on Nathaniel Hayes. "You're a woman who arrived in this town with $14 and 2 children, he said, and the pleasantness was gone. Now, fully gone, replaced by something harder and more honest, the voice of the man underneath the performance. "You have nothing. No standing, no history here, no connections that matter. Elias Carter is a man who's been failing for years. You think a stack of papers. I think a stack of papers with documented evidence presented to a circuit judge by a lawyer, Clara said, is considerably more powerful than a man who spent 30 years confusing money with authority. She looked at him steadily. You thought I was nothing, she said. You thought we both were. You looked at me at that train station and you calculated everything you could see, and you decided the number was 0. She picked the document back up from the counter. You forgot to count what you couldn't see. She turned and walked out. Behind her, the store remained completely silent. She was halfway up the street before Mrs. Aldridge caught up with her, slightly breathless, her coat not fully buttoned. That was either very brave or very foolish, Mrs. Aldridge said. Probably both, Clara said. He's going to move now, Mrs. Aldridge said. You know that. Whatever he was planning for the next 2 weeks, you just accelerated it. I know, Clara said. Are you ready? Clara thought about 18 pages of documentation. She thought about Mrs. Aldridge and the name she'd given. She thought about Harold Finch and the way he'd stopped breathing normally. She thought about Rose saying, "Get him," with her 6-year-old jaw set like iron. She thought about Elias at 2 a.m. sitting across the table in the lamplight, not saying anything, just being there. Yes, she said. We're ready. She went back to the ranch, and she told Elias what had happened, and she watched him listen with the still, controlled attention he brought to everything important. And when she was done, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "You put it in front of him in public." Yes. So now he knows exactly what we have. Yes. And you wanted him to. Yes, she said, because a man like Nathaniel Hayes, when he knows exactly what's coming, makes choices. He doubles down, or he retreats. Those are the only options available to him because he's never had to do anything else. She looked at Elias. And either way, it brings it to a head before he can move quietly through the bank or through some other channel we haven't found yet. You're forcing the confrontation, Elias said. I'm choosing the timing, Clara said. That's different. He looked at her for a long moment. Clara, he said. I know, she said. It might not work. That's not what I was going to say, he said. She waited. I was going to say, Elias said carefully, that I've been fighting this alone for 6 years and getting nowhere, and you've been here 8 weeks. He stopped. Something moved through his face that she had seen glimpses of before, but never this clearly. Something unguarded and real that he had been keeping behind the controlled steadiness for reasons she understood entirely, because she had been doing the same thing. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't walked into that barn. Clara looked at him. She thought about the thing she had been carefully not naming for weeks, the warmth that moved through her when he said her name, the way she had started listening for his footsteps in the morning, the particular quality of the silence between them when they were both in the same room. You would have figured something out, she said. You're not someone who gives up. No, he said. But I might have given out. That's different. He looked at her steadily. There's a difference between not quitting and having a reason to fight. The silence between them this time was a different kind. Not the comfortable silence of two people who don't need to explain themselves. This was the silence of two people standing at the edge of something and both knowing it and neither quite ready to step. 2 weeks, Clara said finally. Let's get through the next 2 weeks. Yes, Elias said. 2 weeks. But they both knew, in the way that certain things are known before they're said, before they're ready, before it's practical or safe to know them, that the 2 weeks were not really what either of them was talking about. Outside, the wind had picked up. Inside, the lamp burned steady. And in the box on the table, 18 pages waited to bring down a man who had spent 30 years believing that nothing and no one in this valley could touch him. I was about to learn how wrong he had been. The next morning, the bank called the loan early. Not in 2 weeks. Not through any official channel that gave them time to prepare. Thomas came back from town before breakfast with his hat in his hands and his face doing something complicated. And when Clara saw him at the door, she knew before he said a word that whatever she had accelerated in that general store had accelerated faster than she'd planned. Finch sent a notice, Thomas said. Delivered to the ranch gate this morning by a courier from Helena. The bank is calling Elias's note. Full amount. 90 days. 90 days. Clara stood very still. How much, she said. $840, Thomas said. The number sat in this room like a physical object. $840 was not a sum that a struggling cattle ranch produced in 90 days in the fall of 1883. It was the kind of number designed to be impossible. It was the kind of number you set when you didn't want the other person to find it, you wanted them to drown in it. Elias came in from the barn. He looked at Thomas's face, then at Clara's. "Tell me," he said. She told him. I was very still for a long moment. Then he sat down at the table and put both hands flat on the wood and looked at them the way a man looks at the only solid things in a room that's starting to spin. 90 days, he said. He moved faster than I expected, Clara said. I miscalculated. I thought confronting him publicly would slow him down, make him cautious about being visible. Instead, it made him decide the quiet approach was over. It's not your fault, Elias said. I pushed him, and he pushed back harder, Clara said. That is in fact partly my fault. Clara. I'm not saying that to be hard on myself, she said. I'm saying it so I don't make the same mistake again. She looked at him. We need a lawyer. Before we get to Judge Harlan, we need someone who can challenge the loan call on procedural grounds. Buy us time. The only lawyer in Willow Creek is Martin Gage, Elias said. And Martin Gage has done Hayes's paperwork for 15 years. Of course he had. Clara stood up and went to the window, not to look at anything specific, but because she needed to move, needed to let the thinking happen through her body, the way it sometimes did when sitting still felt like a trap. She went through the information she had. 18 pages. A circuit judge 2 weeks away. A loan called 90 days out. A lawyer who belonged to the other side. Harold Finch, frightened and indebted, who had pulled the trigger the moment Hayes told him to. She turned around. Finch, she said. Elias looked at her. He's the weak point, she said. Not Hayes. Hayes is the structure. You can't crack the structure directly. You have to find where it's held together by something that doesn't want to hold. She moved back to the table. Finch called this loan because Hayes told him to. But Finch is a man who's been living with what Hayes did for his wife's settlement for 3 years. That's not a comfortable thing to live with. That's the kind of thing that wakes you up at 2 in the morning. She looked at Elias. If I can get in front of him before Hayes gets to him again, he'll go straight to Hayes if you approach him, Elias said. You said so yourself. If I approached him the wrong way, Clara said. There's a right way. What's the right way? She thought about it. About Harold Finch in the bank with his careful eyes and his overperformed confidence. About the 3-second pause before he'd said, that's an internal process. About the way his face had done something involuntary when she'd said in good hands. He's not loyal to Hayes, she said slowly. He's trapped by him. That's different. A loyal man defends what he's defending because he believes in it. A trapped man defends it because he doesn't see a way out. She looked at Elias. If I can show him a way out before Hayes makes it impossible. What kind of way out? Elias said. Testimony, Clara said. In front of Judge Harlan. If Finch testifies to the pressure Hayes applied to the loan being called as a favor, not a legitimate financial decision, the whole bank action falls. And in exchange we document that Finch acted under duress. Not a good outcome for him, but a survivable one. Versus what happens if Hayes goes down and Finch is standing right next to him with no one to speak for him. Elias was quiet. You're offering him the difference between drowning with Hayes and swimming away from him, he said. Yes. He might not take it. He might not, Clara agreed. But I think he will. I think he's been looking for a way out since the day he took the first favor. She put her hands on the table. I need to talk to him today. Before Hayes gets to him and closes whatever door is still open. I'm coming with you, Elias said. Elias. Not to do the talking, he said. Just to be there. Something in his voice had the particular quality of a decision already made, the kind that doesn't negotiate. He went after your daughters. He's calling my loan. I'm done being the man who stays on the ranch while you go into town alone. Clara looked at him for a moment. "All right," she said. "But you let me lead." "Yes," he said. "I'll follow your lead." They left Thomas with the girls. Rose accepted this with her characteristic gravity. Emily, with the protest of someone who felt she was missing something important, which she was, and they rode into Willow Creek together, and Clara was aware of the way the town looked at them when they arrived. 2 weeks ago, she had been the failed bride, the charity case, the woman causing trouble for a good man. Now she was something the town hadn't quite categorized yet, and that uncertainty showed in the faces they passed. She did not read it as hostility. She read it as possibility. People who aren't sure what to think can still be persuaded. People who've already decided are a different problem. They went to the bank. Finch was at his desk. He saw them come in and stood up immediately, the stand of a man whose body has been startled before his mind caught up, and Clara saw in that involuntary motion everything she needed to see. He was already frightened. Hayes had already been in contact. Whatever instructions Finch had been given were sitting in him like something he'd swallowed wrong. "Mr. Finch," Clara said. She kept her voice warm, even. The voice she used when she needed someone to feel that the room was safe enough to breathe in. "Thank you for seeing us." "I didn't say I'd see you," Finch said. His voice had a strained quality. "I don't think this is appropriate." "I know you called the loan this morning," Clara said. She sat down without being invited. Elias sat beside her. Finch remained standing, which was a disadvantage he didn't seem to realize. "And I know why. And I know that you know why. So we can spend the next few minutes pretending this is a normal bank visit, or we can have an honest conversation." She looked up at him. "Mr. Finch, please sit down." He sat down. Because she had said please, and because her voice had the quality of something real in a room that had been full of performance for too long, and people, even frightened, compromised people, respond to real things when they encounter them. "The loan call isn't legitimate," Clara said. "You know that. Elias's payments have been current. His collateral is solid. The only reason that notice went out this morning is because Nathaniel Hayes told you to send it." She paused. "I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here because you're about to make a decision that will define the rest of your life in this town, and I want you to make it with full information." Finch was looking at the desk. "I don't know what you think you know," he started. "I know about the settlement," Clara said quietly. Finch's eyes came up fast. 3 years ago," Clara said. "Your wife left. The settlement was considerably larger than your salary explained. And a business connected to her family's competitors closed around the same time, under circumstances that had Nathaniel Hayes's fingerprints all over them." She kept her voice level. Not accusatory, not triumphant, matter of fact. "Hayes helped you, and now you owe him. And that's why you sent that notice this morning, instead of the one your professional judgment would actually have sent." The silence was very long. "What do you want?" Finch said. His voice had changed. The strain was still there, but something else had moved into it, the particular exhaustion of someone who has been holding something up for a very long time and is starting to feel it in every muscle. "I want your testimony," Clara said. "In front of Judge Harlan when he arrives. I want you to confirm that this loan call was made under pressure from an outside party and does not reflect a legitimate assessment of the Carter Ranch's financial standing." "If I do that," Finch said, "Hayes will." "Hayes is going to go down," Clara said. She said it plainly without drama because it was a fact, and she had learned that facts delivered without performance landed harder than facts delivered with urgency. "I have 18 pages of documentation connecting him to systematic fraud against multiple businesses in this county over 6 years. That documentation goes to Judge Harlan in 13 days, regardless of what you do. The question is whether you're standing beside him when it happens, or whether you're the man who had the courage to tell the truth." Finch looked at Elias for the first time. Elias said nothing. He sat with his hands on his knees and his jaw set, and his eyes on Finch, with the steady, uncomplicated directness of a man who has run out of patience for performances. "He'll know I talked to you," Finch said. "Probably," Clara said. "But knowing isn't the same as being able to stop it." She leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Finch, you are not a bad man. I believe that. I believe you were in a difficult situation, and someone offered you a way out of it, and you took it without understanding fully what it would cost you. That's a human thing. I've done versions of it myself." She paused. "But there's a difference between the mistake you made 3 years ago and the choice you make today. 3 years ago, you were trapped. Today you have options. I'm one of them. I'm one of—" Finch looked at his desk. He looked at the window. He looked at Clara. "What happens to me," he said, "if I testify?" "I'll put in the documentation that you acted under documented duress," Clara said. "That doesn't erase what happened, but it contextualizes it. A judge who's looking at a 30-year pattern of manipulation by one man will understand the difference between a predator and a person who got caught in his net." She held his gaze. "That's the most honest thing I can offer you. I won't promise it'll be painless, but I can promise it'll be survivable." The silence stretched. Outside, a wagon went past on the street. A dog barked somewhere. The ordinary sounds of an ordinary morning in a town that had no idea what was happening in this room. "All right," Finch said. Clara let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "All right," he said again, and he looked like a man who has just set down something very heavy. Not relieved exactly, because the setting down comes with its own discomfort, but lighter. Visibly lighter. "I'll testify." Clara nodded once. "Thank you," she said. She and Elias stood. They were almost to the door when Finch said, "Miss Whitmore." She turned. Howe was still sitting at the desk. He looked older than he had when they'd walked in the way people look older when they stop performing youth. "The boundary dispute," he said. "The one Hayes planned to raise against the collateral. There are documents in the filing cabinet in this office. A correspondence between Hayes and a man named Simmons at the county recorder's office. They were planning to backdate a filing." He paused. "If you need it." Clara looked at him steadily. "Yes," she said. "I need it." He opened the cabinet. She walked back to the desk and took the documents he handed her, and she did not look triumphant. She suspected like what she felt like a woman standing at the exact moment when the tide turns, which is not a dramatic moment at all, but a quiet one, and all the more powerful for that. They were halfway back to the ranch when Elias said, "You knew he'd give you those documents." "I hoped," Clara said. "But you knew." "I knew he needed to do something that felt like his own choice," she said. "Testifying under duress is survivable. Handing over documents voluntarily, that's a decision. That's him stepping towards something instead of being pushed. People need that." She shifted the documents under her arm. "He'll be steadier for it, more reliable on the stand." Elias looked at her. "Where did you learn to do that?" he said. She thought about it honestly. "A lot of years of being the person in the room that nobody thought was paying attention," she said. "You learn to read people very carefully when they've decided they don't need to perform for you." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Is that what I did when you first came to the ranch?" "No," Clara said. "You performed less than anyone I've ever met. That's different." He seemed to think about that for the rest of the ride. The next 10 days were the most dangerous and the most precise of Clara's life. She worked on the documents with the systematic focus of someone building something that could not afford a single structural weakness. She added Finch's correspondence to the package, the backdated filing plan, the connection to the county recorder, and she reorganized everything into a sequence that told the story clearly enough for someone encountering it for the first time to follow it without confusion. Hayes moved in the way she'd expected him to move when he learned Finch had talked. He didn't confront Finch directly, that would have been visible. Instead, stories started circulating. Finch was unreliable. Finch had made errors in other loan decisions. There were questions about his professional conduct. The stories were designed to preemptively undermine his credibility as a witness. Clara documented each story as it circulated, noting who told it and when. She added those to the package too. Mrs. Aldridge came to the ranch on the 7th day with something Clara had not asked for. She came with a letter handwritten sealed and set it on Clara's table without preamble. "What is this?" Clara asked. "My brother-in-law's testimony," Mrs. Aldridge said. "He came when I wrote to him. Took him 3 days to get here from Colorado. He'll speak to what Hayes did to his business 12 years ago. Pattern of behavior. She sat down and folded her hands. I've been waiting 12 years to be useful in this particular way, Miss Whitmore. Don't tell me I'm too late. Clara looked at the sealed letter. She looked at Mrs. Aldridge. You're not too late, she said. Good, Mrs. Aldridge said. Because Samuel is staying at my house and he's not a patient man, and I'd like this resolved before he eats me out of house and home. Clara almost laughed. She hadn't laughed in 10 days. It felt strange and necessary. The night before Judge Harlan was due to arrive, Hayes made his last move. He made it the way. He'd always made his most serious moves quietly through someone else, in a way that gave him distance from the action. Clara found out about it the same way she found out about most things from Thomas, who had been quietly useful throughout all of this, in the steady, unassuming way of someone who doesn't say much but sees everything. 3 men rode past the property tonight, Thomas said. He came in after dark pulling off his gloves. Twice. Didn't stop, didn't say anything, just looked. The message was simple. The message was, I know where you are. I know where your children sleep. Clara stood at the window for a long time after Thomas went back to his bunkhouse. Then she turned around. Elias was standing in the doorway between the front room and the kitchen, and he had a look on his face that she had not seen before. Not the controlled steadiness, not the quiet patience. Something that had moved past both of those things into something simpler and harder. They're not touching this house, he said. I know, Clara said. I mean that, he said. Whatever comes tomorrow, whatever he does next, they are not touching this house. She looked at him. She thought about what he was saying and what he wasn't saying. About the way he had said this house and not my house. About the fact that he had said it with the certainty of a man making a statement about something that already belonged to all of them. I know, she said again, quietly. Do you trust me? He asked. The question was simple, and it was not simple at all. She thought about everything she had trusted since Missouri. The institution of marriage, which had been genuine and then been taken. Her own ability to survive, which had been tested at every point and had held. The letter in this wooden box, which had promised something that turned out to be nothing. Mrs. Aldridge, who had surprised her. Thomas, who had been steady. Her own daughters, who had been braver than they should have had to be. Yes, she said. I trust you. Something settled in his face. Not relief, he hadn't been afraid she'd say no. Something more like arrival. Like a man who has been walking toward something for a long time and has finally put his foot on the ground he was walking toward. Then try to sleep, he said. Tomorrow matters. She went to bed. She lay in the dark next to her daughters. Emily, warm and sprawled, rose straight and still, and she listened to the quiet of the house, and she thought about tomorrow. Judge Harlan arrived on a gray November morning on the 11 o'clock stage. He was a compact man, late 50s, with a face that suggested he had been lied to by more interesting people than most, and had stopped being surprised by it. He came into Willow Creek without ceremony and went directly to the town hall, where the town council met, and where, because word traveled fast in small towns, and Clara had made sure of it, a significant portion of Willow Creek was already waiting. Nathaniel Hayes was there. He was standing with Martin Gage, his lawyer, near the front of the room, dressed well, and composed the posture of a man who is confident about what is coming, because he has managed every variable he can see. He saw Clara come in with Elias, and he looked at them with the expression that had replaced the pleasantness entirely, now flat, assessing the look of a man doing rapid calculations about what he didn't know. She watched him calculate. She watched him see the box of documents under her arm, and Mrs. Aldridge beside her, and Finch, pale and determined, standing 2 feet away from them. She watched him see his lawyer's face change as Gage registered the same things. She watched Hayes look for the thing that told him he was still in control and not find it. He looked at Clara. She looked back. He looked away first. Judge Harlan called the room to order with a single sharp sound on the table, and the kind of brevity that came from not being interested in performance. I'm told there's a matter involving a property loan, a series of commercial contracts, and potential fraud, he said. I'd like to hear from the party making the allegation first. Keep it to the facts. Clara stood up. She had expected to feel afraid at this moment. She had spent 10 days preparing for it and had told herself that fear was reasonable, that fear alongside action was courage, that she was ready. What she had not expected was what she actually felt, which was clarity. The particular clean clarity that comes when everything you've been working toward is finally in front of you, and the only thing between now and the outcome is the quality of what you've prepared. "Your Honor," she said, "my name is Clara Whitmore. I have been managing the accounts of the Carter Ranch for the past 8 weeks. In the course of that work, I discovered a pattern of deliberate financial manipulation that has been conducted against this property over a period of 6 or more years." She opened the box. She put the first document on the table. "This is where it begins." She went through it methodically, not dramatically. Not with the emotional weight. She felt the anger and the fear and the weariness of 8 weeks of precise, relentless work. She laid it out the way she laid out anything important, clearly, sequentially, in language that moved from point to documented point without gaps. The supply contracts, the amendments, Western Ridge Partners, the delivery shortfalls, 17 of them, everyone documented, the boundary dispute, the backdated filing plan, the correspondence with the county recorder, and finally, Finch's testimony, which he delivered in a voice that shook slightly at the beginning and steadied as he went, the voice of someone who has made a decision and is committed to it now, regardless of what it costs. Hayes's lawyer objected 3 times. Judge Harlan overruled all 3 the second and third times with an expression that suggested he found the objections less interesting than what Clara was presenting. Then Hayes stood up. Martin Gage tried to stop him. Clara saw Gage put a hand on Hayes's arm and Hayes shake it off. The way you shake off something that has misread the situation. And then Nathaniel Hayes walked to the center of the room and he spoke. And this was the thing Clara had not fully anticipated. Not the speech itself, but the form of it. Because Hayes did not deny the documents. He didn't attack Finch directly or challenge the supply contract evidence. He did something more sophisticated than that, and also something more revealing. He talked about what he deserved. He talked about the Hayes family's history in this valley, about 3 decades of building something, about what it meant to be a man who had created prosperity in a place where there had been nothing. He talked about Elias Carter's failures, not as attacks, but as sadness, as the regret of a man who had tried to help a struggling neighbor and been misunderstood. He talked about Clara without naming her, which was its own particular calculated insult, as an outside influence. Someone who had arrived without context or history and misread the complex relationships of a community she didn't understand. It was impressive. It would have worked on a different audience in a different room. But Judge Harlan was not a different audience, and this was not a different room, and Clara watched the judge's face as Hayes spoke, and she saw something that made the cold, tight thing she'd been carrying in her chest for weeks begin slowly to release. Harlan was not moved. Not because he was cruel or indifferent. She could see that he was listening carefully, that he was a man who took seriously the weight of what he was doing. But he was also a man who had spent decades looking at documents, and he had spent the last 45 minutes looking at Clara's, and what Hayes was offering in place of documents was narrative. And Judge Harlan knew the difference. When Hayes finished, Harlan looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at Clara. "Ms. Whitmore," he said, "the document on page 11 of your package, the amendment to the Harmon Brothers contract. Can you walk me through the signature verification one more time?" Clara walked him through it. Harlan looked at the signatures. He looked at the Western Ridge Partners registration. He looked at Hayes. "Mr. Hayes," he said, "are you the managing partner of Western Ridge Partners as registered with the state of Montana?" A very long pause. "That is a company I have an interest in," Hayes said carefully. "Are you the managing partner?" Harlan said again, with the patience of a man who has all day and no interest in evasion. The room was completely silent. Hayes looked at Gage. Gage looked at the table. The answer was in the documents, and everyone in the room knew it was in the documents, and everyone in the room waited to see whether Nathaniel Hayes would tell a demonstrable lie in front of a circuit judge, or whether he would say what the papers said. "Yes," Hayes said. The word landed in the room, and the room shifted. Not dramatically. Not with gasps or outbursts. Just shifted. The way a scale shifts when the weight is finally settled on the right side. Clara felt it as a physical thing, a change in the pressure of the air, and she pressed her hands flat on the table because they were shaking, and she did not want them to shake right now, not quite yet. Harlan made a note. He asked 4 more questions, all of them precise, and all of them unanswerable, without confirming what the documents already showed. Then he called a short recess. Clara sat in the recess with Elias beside her, and her hands still pressed flat on the table, and she did not speak. There was nothing to say. The documents had done their work. The testimony had done its work. All of it was out of her hands now, in the way that things go out of your hands when you've done everything you can do, and the outcome becomes something you wait for instead of something you build. Elias put his hand over hers on the table. Just that. No words, no performance. She turned her hand over and held his. Harlan came back. He spoke for 12 minutes. He referenced specific documents. He cited the pattern of behavior, the systematic nature of the manipulation, and what he called the deliberate exploitation of a vulnerable period following the death of the elder Carter. He referenced Finch's testimony and the exculpatory documentation Clara had included regarding his duress. He issued an immediate injunction on the loan call. He referred the Western Ridge Partners fraud to the Helena District Court with his recommendation for full prosecution. He voided the supply contract amendments. He dismissed the boundary dispute filing and referred the backdating scheme to the county attorney. He looked at Nathaniel Hayes and said in the same quiet, unhurried voice he had used throughout, "Mr. Hayes, I have been on this circuit for 11 years. I have seen a great many things. I would advise you to retain skilled counsel immediately." Hayes said nothing. He stood in the center of the room, where he had stood with the confidence of a man who owned this town and this valley and everyone in it, and he said nothing, and Clara looked at him for a long moment because she wanted to see what a man looked like when the thing he had spent 30 years building collapsed, not in a dramatic moment, but in 12 minutes of procedural language by a quiet judge in a frontier town hall. He looked smaller. That was all. Not broken, not destroyed, just smaller. The actual size of him, without the architecture of manipulation holding him up. Clara looked away. Mrs. Aldridge was crying, which Clara had not expected, and which she felt move through her like something unlocking. Samuel, the brother-in-law from Colorado, sat beside her with his hand on her shoulder, and a look on his face that was 12 years of waiting finally set down. Finch was standing near the back of the room, looking like a man who has just survived something he wasn't sure he was going to survive, and is still processing what that means. And Elias was beside her, still holding her hand, and he said very quietly, just for her, "Clara." She turned and looked at him. He looked like himself. Exactly and entirely himself. The worn face, the steady eyes, the man who had sat across from her at 2 a.m. and not needed to say anything, because being there was enough. He looked like the man who had seen her daughters shivering in his barn and thought of warmth before he thought of anything else. He looked like someone she had come to know completely over 8 weeks of working and fighting and being afraid together in the way that you know people you would have taken years to know otherwise. "It's done," he said. "Yes," she said. "You did that." "We did that," she said. He looked at her for a long moment, and there was nothing complicated in his expression, and nothing held back, and Clara thought about the word "chosen" that she had used that evening at the table when she hadn't meant to say it aloud, and she thought about what it meant to be chosen, not because you were easy or convenient or uncomplicated, but because someone had looked at everything. You were the worn dress, the cracked boots, the 2 daughters, the $14, the anger, the precision, the stubbornness, the 2 a.m. work, and decided that was exactly what they wanted standing beside them. "Elias," she said. "Yes," he said, simply, as if he already knew what she was going to say, and the answer was yes, and had been yes for a while. She almost smiled. "Thank you," she said, "for the barn." He looked at her and the corner of his mouth moved. "You'd have found shelter somewhere," he said. "Maybe," she said. "But it wouldn't have been the same." Outside, the November wind was doing something cold and purposeful against the walls of the town hall, and inside the room was beginning to move and breathe again as people stood and spoke and processed what had just happened in their town. Hayes was talking to Gage in a low, urgent voice in the corner. Finch had gone. Mrs. Aldridge was being embraced by her brother-in-law, and Clara Whitmore sat in a chair in Willow Creek, Montana, 400 miles from the life she had left, and 6 feet from the man who had offered her a barn in a storm, and she felt something she had not let herself feel in 2 years, because she had not been able to afford it. She felt quietly and without performance, and for the first time since Missouri, like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Not the quiet of 2 people who have nothing to say, but the quiet of 2 people who have too much and are letting it settle before any of it becomes words. Clara held the empty document box in her lap. She had left the originals with Judge Harlan kept copies for herself, and she looked at the road ahead and felt the strange, unmoored feeling that comes after a long fight is finished. Not peace exactly. Something rawer than peace. The feeling of a person who has been holding a wall up with both hands for months and has finally carefully been allowed to let go and now doesn't quite know what to do with their hands. Elias drove. He did not speak. He understood she had learned the exact weight of silence in a way that most people never did knew when it needed filling and when it needed leaving alone. Thomas met them at the gate. He looked at their faces, and then he smiled the slow, uncomplicated smile of a man who has been hoping for a particular thing and just found out it happened. He didn't say anything either. He just took the horse's reins and nodded once, and that was enough. Rose was waiting on the porch. She had positioned herself there with the absolute intentionality of a 6-year-old who has decided she is going to be the first person to know, and she stood with her arms crossed and her expression carefully controlled, performing composure in a way that was so purely Clara that it stopped Clara on the steps. "Well," Rose said. "It's done," Clara said. Rose uncrossed her arms. For 1 second. Just one. Her face did something entirely unguarded, something that was pure child and pure relief, before she pulled it back and stood straight and said with the dignity of someone accepting news rather than receiving it, "Good." Clara pulled her into her arms and held her hard. Rose held on with both arms and did not say anything else and did not need to. Emily heard the commotion from inside and came out at speed in her socks, sliding on the wooden floor, and launched herself at Clara's side with the full-body commitment of a 4-year-old who has been waiting longer than she can manage and is done managing. "Did you get him?" she demanded into Clara's coat. "Did you get the bad man with the mean eyes?" "We got him," Clara said. Emily made a sound of pure satisfaction and then wiggled free to look at Elias. "Did you help?" she asked him seriously. "Your mother did most of it," Elias said. "But did you help?" He considered this with appropriate gravity. "Yes," he said. "A little." "Good," Emily said in the exact same tone Rose had used and went back inside, apparently satisfied. Elias looked at Clara over the top of Rose's head. She looked back at him, and they both slowly finally smiled. The days that followed were quieter than anything Clara had known in years. Not empty. Fuller, in fact, than they had been before, but the fullness was different now, not the urgent fullness of a problem that needed solving, but the ordinary fullness of a life that was actually being lived. She still woke early. That habit she suspected would never fully leave her. But now she woke to a house that had stopped feeling borrowed and started feeling inhabited, which was a different thing entirely. She woke to the sound of Emily talking to the horses through the back window before she was fully dressed. She woke to Rose already sitting at the table with whatever she was currently reading. The girl had discovered Elias's small collection of books and was working through them with systematic determination. She woke to the smell of coffee that Elias had started before he went out for the morning check, which was a small thing, and not a small thing at all. The town shifted around her in the weeks after Harlan's ruling. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Small towns don't turn on a single moment. They adjust gradually like a compass needle finding north small degrees at a time. But it happened. She noticed it in the way people looked at her on the street. Less assessment, more acknowledgement. In the way the women at the general store included her in conversation instead of pausing when she walked up. In the way Mr. Calloway called her by her first name for the first time and then seemed embarrassed about how long it had taken him to do it. Mrs. Aldridge did not change at all, which Clara considered a compliment of the highest order. Nathaniel Hayes left Willow Creek in the first week of December. He did not make an announcement. He did not have a conversation with anyone that anyone reported back to Clara. He simply stopped being present. His house closed up his ranch, managed by a hired foreman. His name appearing in the Helena papers in connection with the district court proceedings that would take the better part of a year to resolve. The absence of him was louder than his presence had been, in the way that a sound you've grown accustomed to becomes conspicuous only when it stops. Clara felt the absence without satisfaction and without grief. She had not done what she did to destroy Nathaniel Hayes. She had done it to protect what mattered to her. That those two things had overlapped was a practical coincidence and not a personal triumph. She was clear about that distinction. Harold Finch stayed in Willow Creek. His testimony had been noted by Harlan as given under documented duress, exactly as Clara had promised. He lost his position at the bank that was unavoidable, and he had known it, but he found work with the county recorder's office by February, and Clara heard from Mrs. Aldridge that he seemed on balance like a man who was sleeping better than he had in 3 years. She was glad of that, gladder than she would have expected. What she had not anticipated, the thing that surprised her in the particular way that the best things surprise you by arriving through a door you weren't watching, was what happened to Elias. Not to his ranch. Though the ranch recovered steadily, as the supply contracts were renegotiated and the delivery shortfalls were reimbursed through the Helena proceedings. Not to his finances, though those improved measurably as the weight of Hayes's systematic extraction was lifted. What happened to Elias happened in smaller ways. Interior ways. Ways that Clara noticed because she had become over 3 months of living and working beside him, fluent in the particular language of this particular person. He laughed more. That was the first thing. Not loudly, Elias Carter was not a loud man and was not going to become one. But there was a quality that had been absent from him when she'd first arrived. Something that had been covered by the accumulated weight of 6 years of fighting a losing battle alone, and it had started coming back. She heard it first with Emily, who was constitutionally incapable of being around any person for longer than 20 minutes without making them laugh, whether they wanted to or not. She heard it with Thomas, who had apparently been storing jokes for years and had finally found an audience willing to receive them. She heard it with Rose, who had a dry and unexpected humor that had begun to emerge now that she felt safe enough to let it, and occasionally she heard it directed at her. "You organized my book collection," he said one evening, looking at the shelf. "It was chaos," Clara said. "It had a system. It had a pile. I knew where everything was. You described the location of a book to me last Tuesday as somewhere in the middle, and then found it on the bottom." He looked at the shelf. He looked at her. "It looks very tidy," he said, which was not a concession, but was as close as he typically got to one. She smiled at the wall so he couldn't see it. It was Rose who said it first. Of course it was Rose. Clara had learned to anticipate her older daughter's directness, the way you learn to anticipate weather. You could see it coming, you could prepare for it, but you couldn't always brace enough. Rose had been watching Elias and Clara for weeks with that particular watching expression, filing things, sorting them. And Clara had known the conversation was coming the way she knew most things that were inevitable, by feeling it in the quality of the air before the storm. It came on a Sunday evening in January. Clara was at the table. The girls had been in bed for 20 minutes. Elias had gone out to check the east fence, and came back in, and the ordinary domestic geography of the room. Clara at the table. Lamplight, the sound of someone else's footsteps in the house, was the kind of thing that Clara no longer noticed because she had stopped bracing against it. It had become simply what evenings were. Rose's voice came from the hallway. "Mama." Clara looked up. Rose was standing in the doorway in her nightgown, not with the look of a child who has had a bad dream or needs water, but with the look of a child who has been lying awake thinking and has decided the thinking is done and the saying needs to happen. "You should ask him," Rose said. Clara was very still. "Rose." "Or let him ask you," Rose said. "But one of you needs to do it because Emily and I have been waiting, and Emily is not patient." She looked at Elias, who had also gone very still near the door. She likes you, Rose told him directly. In case you needed to know. Rose, Clara said, and her voice had the particular quality of a woman managing several emotions at once with incomplete success. I'm going back to bed, Rose said. I just wanted to say that. She looked at Elias one more time with her serious eyes. Good night, Mr. Carter. Good night, Rose, Elias said. She went. The room was very quiet. Clara looked at the table. She felt her face doing something she couldn't fully control, and she decided to stop trying to control it because she was tired of controlling everything all the time, and there was no one in this room who needed her to perform composure. Elias moved from the door to the table. He sat down. He did not say anything for a moment, which was characteristic, and Clara waited, the way she had learned to wait for him without filling the space without pre-answering the question. She's right, he said. Clara looked up at him. I've been waiting, he said. Not because I wasn't certain. I was certain a long time before I had any right to be. But I didn't want to say it while the fight was still happening. It didn't feel clean. I didn't want you to wonder later whether it was real or whether it was the pressure of everything we were going through. He looked at her steadily, with the direct, uncomplicated look that had been the thing she'd noticed first about him. The quality of a man who said what he meant and meant what he said. I want you to know that this is separate from all of that. This is me asking you with nothing else happening on an ordinary Sunday evening whether you would be willing to stay. Clara held his gaze. Stay, she said. Here, he said. With me. Permanently. He paused. With the girls. I want that too. That's not a separate thing. That's the same thing. She thought about Missouri. She thought about the wooden box of letters and the train and the worn dress and the $14. She thought about the train platform and Nathaniel Hayes's face and the particular public quality of that humiliation that had been designed to make her feel small enough to disappear. She thought about walking away from it with her daughter's hands in hers and the one promise she had made to herself that she would never allow anyone to decide her worth again. She thought about Elias in the barn doorway with a lantern and the warm food and the way he'd handed Rose coffee with both hands, because he'd noticed that Rose was the kind of person who needed to hold things when she was uncertain. She thought about 2 a.m. and the lamp and the papers and the silence that was comfortable because neither of them needed it to be anything else. She thought about his hand over hers in the town hall when everything was out of her hands and there was nothing left to do but wait. She thought about this difference between being chosen because you were easy and being chosen because someone had looked at all of it. Every difficult, complicated, worn at the edges part of it, and decided that was exactly what they wanted. Yes, she said. He let out a breath. Not a dramatic breath. Not a sigh of relief. Just the breath of a man who has been holding something carefully for a long time and has finally been given permission to set it down. Yes, she said again, because it was worth saying twice. I'll stay. He reached across the table and took her hand, and she let him. And they sat like that in the lamplight on an ordinary Sunday evening in January, and neither of them said anything else for a while, because the thing that had been building for 3 months had finally said itself, and what comes after something like that is not more words, but simply presence. Simply the fact of being in the same room and knowing that the room is yours and is going to stay yours. They were married in the spring, not because the season demanded it, or because there was any particular hurry. The hurry was gone. The hurry had been gone since November, since the moment in the town hall when the scale had tipped and the fight had finished. They were married in the spring, because by then everything felt ready, the way the land feels ready after a hard winter, not soft, not easy, but open, prepared for what came next. The wedding was small. Mrs. Aldridge made Clara's dress. She did it without being asked and without discussion, simply arrived one Tuesday morning in February with fabric and pins and the expression of someone performing a task they have assigned themselves and do not intend to be talked out of. Clara stood in the seamstress shop while Mrs. Aldridge worked around her, and she looked at herself in the long mirror and thought about the faded blue dress she'd worn on the train platform, the one Nathaniel Hayes had looked at and found wanting. This dress was simple, clean, made of fabric the color of late afternoon sky. It did not announce anything, It simply fit her well exactly as she was. "You look like yourself," Mrs. Aldridge said from behind her, pinning the hem. "Is that good?" Clara asked. "It's the best thing a person can look like," Mrs. Aldridge said, and said nothing else, and Clara believed her. Samuel, the brother-in-law from Colorado, came back for it. Thomas wore his good hat, which Clara had not known he possessed, and which he clearly felt very serious about. Judge Harlan, making his spring circuit, happened to be in Willow Creek, and performed the ceremony with the same quiet efficiency he brought to everything. No flourishes, no unnecessary words, just the thing itself, said clearly and witnessed properly. Rose wore her best dress and stood beside Clara with absolute composure until the moment Elias said "I do," at which point she pressed her lips together very hard and looked at the ceiling, which was her version of crying. Emily carried wildflowers. She had picked herself from the field behind the barn that morning approximately 3 times more flowers than any person needed to carry, because Emily had decided that more was better in all things, and no one had successfully argued her out of this position. When it was done, when the words had been said, and the papers signed, and Harlan had shaken both their hands. With his dry, efficient handshake, Emily looked up at Elias with a very serious expression and said, "What do I call you now?" Elias crouched down to her level. He thought about it seriously, the way he always took Emily's question seriously, which was one of the things Clara had watched and felt move through her every time she saw it. "What would you like to call me?" he said. Emily considered. "Papa," she said with the slight uncertainty of someone trying out a word to see if it fits. Something moved across Elias's face that Clara had not seen before and would not forget after. Not sentimental. He was not a sentimental man. Something deeper than sentimental. Something that had been carefully put away for a long time and had just been handed permission to exist. "Yes," he said. "That fits just fine." Emily nodded satisfied and went to redistribute her wildflowers to anyone who would take them. Rose waited until the others had moved away. She stood in front of Elias with her arms at her sides and her chin level and her expression doing the serious thing, and she looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Thank you for the barn." He looked at her. "What for?" "For opening the door," Rose said. "You didn't have to." Elias was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Yes, I did." Rose accepted this with a single nod. Then she walked away to find her sister, and Elias looked at Clara, and Clara looked at him, and they were married, and the spring was cold and clear and full of light, and the ranch stretched out around them for 340 acres, and it was theirs. 2 years later, Clara sat at the table on an evening in October. The papers were gone. Not the memory of them, but the physical objects filed in the county records where they belonged, part of a history that had been resolved and put in order and was no longer something she needed to carry. The wooden box was still on the shelf, but she had taken the letters out a long time ago. Not because she was angry at them, because they had stopped being the most important documents she owned. She was writing a letter, not an advertisement, not a business letter. A letter to a woman in Kansas whose name she'd gotten from the pastor's wife, a widow with children who had written to the church asking whether anyone knew of opportunities in Montana. The pastor's wife had passed the name to Clara without comment, which was the most eloquent thing she had ever done. Clara wrote the letter carefully. She wrote about the valley, about the work, about what it actually looked like to build something from nothing in a place that didn't know you yet. She wrote honestly that it was hard that people judged you before they knew you, that there were people who would see your children and call them complications and mean it. She wrote that those people were wrong and that the wrongness was their problem and not yours. She wrote that Montana was worth it if you were willing to fight for your place in it. She wrote, "Bring your children. They are not a burden. They are the reason." Elias came in while she was writing. He looked at the letter on the table. He did not ask what it was. He simply looked at her with the look she knew now as fluently as she knew anything. The quiet, certain look of a man who is exactly where he wants to be, and he put a cup of coffee beside her without saying anything. "Thank you," she said. He said, and went to sit in the chair by the fire. Rose appeared from the hallway with a book. She folded herself into the corner of the bench, opened it, and began to read. 8 years old now, and the watching expression had deepened from watchfulness into something that would eventually become wisdom. Clara could already see it. Emily came in from outside, boots loud on the floor, and dropped dramatically onto the bench beside Rose. "Papa said I could name the new foal," she announced. "What are you going to name it?" Rose asked without looking up. "I'm deciding," Emily said. "It's a serious decision." "Very serious," Rose agreed, still not looking up. "Possibly the most serious decision anyone has ever made." "In Montana," Rose said. "In the world," Emily corrected. Elias, from the chair by the fire, made a sound that was unmistakably a laugh. Emily looked at him with wide, affronted eyes. "It is serious," she told him. "I know it is," he said. "I'm not laughing at the decision. I'm laughing at you." "That's," Emily said. "Probably," he agreed. Clara looked down at the letter in her hands. The fire was warm. The room was full of the sound of her family. Outside, the Montana dark was coming down early the way it did in October, fast and clean and full of stars. She thought about the train platform, the worn dress and the cracked boots, and the two little girls hiding behind her skirt. The public calculation of her worth in 30 seconds by a man who had never once looked past what he could see. She thought about walking away from it and the one promise she had made to herself that she would never allow anyone to decide her worth again. She had kept that promise. But she had learned something more important than the promise. Something she hadn't known to write down when she made it, that worth was not a thing you defended after someone had tried to take it. Worth was a thing you built. Quietly, precisely, with documents and stubbornness, and the willingness to do the work when no one was watching, and with the people who showed up in the barn during the storm and opened the door and didn't ask you to explain yourself before they let you in from the cold. She picked up her pen. She finished the letter to the woman in Kansas. She wrote the last line. "Come. Montana is worth it, and so are you." Then she folded it and addressed it and set it aside to send in the morning, and she looked up at the room around her, at Rose reading, at Emily, debating with herself about names in a voice that was not exactly quiet, at Elias in the chair by the fire, with his long legs stretched out and his eyes closed, and the faint line of a smile at the corner of his mouth. And she felt the thing she had been building toward since Missouri. The thing that all the fear and the precision and the anger had been in service of settle into her chest, like something that had finally come home. She had traveled 400 miles looking for someone to give her a future. She had found instead the ground where she could build one herself. And the man who had once thought she had nothing had discovered too late. What happened when you underestimated a woman who had already decided that losing was simply not an option she was willing to choose? Clara Whitmore had arrived in Montana with $14, 2 daughters, and one worn leather suitcase. She had built from it something that no one, not distance, not debt, not 30 years of another man's ambition, would ever take from her again. Not because someone had given it to her, because she had earned